In 5th place, time to visit a haunted house. Our lovely narrator Claire was familiar with the family, with her mom having taught the would-be clients in preschool and was asked to cover a shift whenever the regular sitter was unavailable. Over the course of one evening in particular, 4 odd things happened. Let's count them down, shall we? First, the boys were pulling out food for dinner, and they set a container of salsa on the counter. Minutes later, while prepping food, the container burst and sent salsa flying all across the room, all over the walls, the cabinets, and the fridge. Odd, but Claire assumed it was just kind of old and some gas had built up in the container. I can't imagine that was fun to clean. Well, while she was cleaning it and the boys were in the kitchen helping her, they all heard a loud thud in the living room. Rushing as a group into the other room, they saw that 2 framed photos on opposite walls had fallen to the floor at the same time. Neither of them appeared damaged, but they both landed right on the floor. Claire propped them up against the walls, but left them alone. Weird. Later, when the entire posse was upstairs, Claire was waiting in the hallway while the boys took turns in the bathroom taking their evening showers, and suddenly she heard a weird dinging sound. She walked down the hallway and noticed that the computer in the study was turning on and off and making all sorts of weird noises. Sure, there are explanations for that, but after all the other events, Claire was very much on edge, and rightfully so. She finally got the boys to bed and went downstairs to watch TV for the rest of the time until the parents got home. As she was sitting in the living room, trying to relax her racing brain, she heard footsteps upstairs, and that's number 4. Assuming the boys had gotten up, she tiptoed upstairs to check. Their bedroom door was closed, and when she peeked inside, both boys were fast asleep in their beds. Claire went back downstairs, and within minutes, she heard the creaking yet again. The boys never called out to her, and there wasn't any noise besides that. She didn't report anything else weird happening, but I would recommend a deep spiritual cleanse of the house if I were that family. Just my 2 cents. In 4th place, we have a case of moving dolls. As someone who collects creepy dolls, this story definitely intrigued me from the get-go. Here's the thing with dolls with a personality, okay? They have to be treated with respect, carefully preserved, and be in a quasi-emotionally stable environment, or else weird things are, they're gonna happen. Don't worry, I promise a video on my personal creepy doll collection is coming soon. I'm just waiting on one of them to be ready to take a day trip to be on camera. It's a whole thing, but we respect boundaries. Where was I again? Oh, right. Poor Ashley. She arrived at the Lanford house one night, ready for what she thought was a typical babysitting evening. Upon encountering Sarah, mother of Kelly, she realized that poor Kelly was indexed within an inch of her life. Sarah had prepared a thoroughly detailed binder of everything Ashley would ever need to know about Kelly, and more. From a tab explicitly spelling out Kelly's allergies, to her every phobia, each show she was allowed to watch on TV and when they'd be on, and more. It took a while for Ashley to scoot Sarah out the door, but when she did, Ashley breathed a sigh of relief, wondering if the night was going to be an easy evening, or what the heck had she gotten herself into. Going through the binder herself, she observed that it was indeed supper time, in accordance with the minute-accurate schedule, and began following the precise instructions, prepping the water pot to boil. I would never be able to follow a minute schedule. No, thank you. While she waited for the water to, do its thing, Kelly offered to introduce her to the dolls that were in the living room, and Ashley happily accepted, hoping to figure out if the ward was genuinely neurotic or just a poor victim of extreme helicopter parenting. Kelly introduced Ashley to each doll in great detail, and then began to act out scenarios, pretending as if the dolls were alive and out to hurt her. Now look, I'm not gonna pretend I was a normal kid, but I don't think I put my Barbies in a scenario to end my life. I'm thinking, yeah, I don't think so. Poor Ashley ran for the binder, flipping through the phobia and usual behavior sections in an attempt to see if there was a way to placate the situation, when suddenly, Kelly stopped, as if nothing had happened. Ashley tried prompting her, seeing what had taken over, but nothing. By this point, the pot in the kitchen had finally reached a boil, and Ashley turned her attention to making dinner, hoping that sticking to the schedule would avoid any further weird behavior. After supper was over, and Kelly was watching one of the pre-approved shows on the list, Ashley noticed that some of the dolls that were previously in the display case had disappeared, and she couldn't find them anywhere in the house. Kelly hadn't left the first floor of the home while Ashley was making dinner, so she couldn't have just run off with them. She tried to shrug it off, but the weird thoughts continued to plague her mind, and rightfully so. It wasn't until later, when the duo was upstairs, that Ashley found one of the dolls hanging upside down from a painting that was way too tall for Kelly to reach in any way, and parts of another throughout Kelly's room while trying to put her to sleep. Ashley was thoroughly terrified at this point, and yeah, ditto, and when Sarah arrived home, bolted from the house as quickly as she could. The next morning, she woke up at home in her own bed with the last of the missing dolls next to her. She mailed it back with no return address and refused to ever enter the Lanford home ever again. In third place, we have a Scream knockoff. While Taylor was in her last year of university, she was determined to make extra money and decided to post ads online for babysitting and dog walking services, adding photos of herself and her phone number in an attempt to appear as legitimate as possible. Roughly an hour after finalizing her posting, Taylor was cooking herself dinner and heard her cell phone ringing from where she left it in her upstairs bedroom. Sadly, she couldn't retrieve it immediately since, she was handling a lot of hot pans, so she let it ring out. A few minutes later, it began to ring again, and when she didn't retrieve that call either, whoever it was called back, and repeatedly until she was finally able to leave her pans and bolt upstairs to answer it. When she picked up, all that she could hear was heavy breathing, so after she didn't get a reply, she hung up, but the phone rang again the moment she put it down. Annoyed by this point, and I would be too, Taylor picked up once again, this time finally encountering a male voice. The conversation began normally, so Taylor assumed that the call before was just a bad connection. He explained that he had a duo of very young offspring and wanted to know if she thought she could handle that responsibility. Taylor informed him that she had experienced dealing with poorly behaved clientele before and assured the man that she could handle what he was describing. The man followed up by asking if she could do any overnights, and this is where the red flag started to kick in for Taylor. Dang, I should have brought one today with me to count them off. Oh well, just imagine it, right here. Whee! Thanks to common sense kicking in, she firmly said that she would not babysit overnight and was met with only heavy breathing in response. She asked if he was still there, and after a period of silence, the voice asked, "Are you a virgin?" Taylor, completely stunned, hung up the phone immediately. The phone kept ringing nonstop for the next hour. The awful man had withheld his number, so she couldn't specifically block that number at first, but then eventually found the function to block withheld numbers on her phone, did it, deleted her number from the ad site, and went on to message every other person on there in her local area with a babysitting ad to warn them, finding out that this caller was a common annoyance or rite of passage to those who had listed their numbers. Poor Taylor was so scared that she was jumping at every shadow for the rest of the evening. In second place, we have the end of a life. Sheila Schrock was a teenage orphan who lived with her older brother in Birmingham, Michigan, an attractive and affluent community. Sheila was babysitting in an upstairs room of a house at 1772 Villa Street early in the evening of January 19th of 1976 when she was surprised by a man who had just come from breaking into 3 other houses in the neighborhood, holding a pry bar and a screwdriver. Her assailant, described by a witness as a thin young white male, somewhere between the ages of 18 to 25, around 5'10" or 6 feet, with a sparse beard, prominent nose, pointed chin, removed her clothing, forcibly fornicated with her, and as this horrified neighbor witness watched from a nearby roof from which he was shoveling snow, ended her with a series of shots from a semi-automatic. That's specific. Allegedly, the attacker looted the home, making off with a firearm, jewelry, and blended in with the crowd on the street to escape. The eyewitness described the vehicle as a 1967 Cadillac, and even with all this detailing, he has never been apprehended. Poor Sheila. Like, that is such a specific remembrance of somebody's face, and even with all that, you can't apprehend him? Dang. In first place, we have a complete kidnapping. On October 24th of 1953, Viggo Rasmussen, a professor at La Crosse State College in Wisconsin, hired Evelyn Hartley, the daughter of a fellow professor, to take care of his own very young daughter. That evening, Evelyn's father Richard called the Rasmussen house several times after she failed to check in as planned around 8:30 p.m. and was met with no answer each time. Concerned, he drove to the house, and when he arrived, the doors were locked, the lights and radio were on, and items were scattered all over the house. The living room furniture had been moved around to different places, ditto for Evelyn's school books. Richard found her shoes in different rooms, with one shoe upstairs and another downstairs. He also found his daughter's broken glasses upstairs, but no sign of his actual daughter anywhere in the home. During the search of the house, Richard observed that every room that could be locked was in fact locked, minus a basement room at the back of the house that had an opened window that was missing a screen. The missing screen was located outside of the room in the backyard, leaning against a short stepladder. Pry marks were found on some of the windows, and footprints had been found in areas of the house, along with traces of red fluid, leading to red handprints, on the garage that was over 100 feet away. Oddly enough, the charge Evelyn was watching was still fast asleep and unharmed. Police believe someone took Evelyn through the yard, but dropped her on the ground before carrying her further, and this was supported by the police dogs who tracked her scent trail that ended 2 blocks away, where it's assumed that she was tossed into a vehicle, just like a sack of potatoes. They were told by one neighbor that they had seen a car repeatedly driving around the neighborhood, and another person who lived nearby claimed they had heard screams an hour earlier, assuming it was just from local kids playing. Now, before anyone calls out nonsense on that, have you heard kids playing in the neighborhood? That gets loud. 2 days after the incident, local resident Ed Hoffer told police that while driving his vehicle, he was almost hit by a dark green, two-tone 1942 Buick as it was speeding in a westerly direction. So for me, I'm like, okay, green car? Inside the Buick, Ed reported seeing one man was driving the vehicle, while a second man was in the backseat with a girl. Ed also reported that a few minutes before the incident, he had seen the same two men with the young girl as he was pulling outside his brother-in-law's house, located conveniently around the corner from the Rasmussen house. Ed stated that the girl was wedged between the two men, and he had thought that she was, intoxicated, as the two men were holding her by the arms as they were walking down the street. Now, if you think this all sounds a little too suspicious and made up, you're not alone. The police did bring in Ed as a suspect, but sadly he passed 2 lie detector tests, and no remains or DNA were found on his property. Some folks, such as myself, are pretty sure he had something to do with all of this. Several days after that fateful night, various items of clothing, many of which were stained with red, were found at different locations, and tests proved that the red stains matched Evelyn's DNA. Over 1,000 members of the local community, including law enforcement officers, the National Guard, Boy Scouts, and La Crosse State college students and faculty participated in a search. A vehicle inspection program was also undertaken with the intent of searching every vehicle in La Crosse County. Gas station attendants were asked to check cars for red stains, and recent graves were reopened to determine if Evelyn's remains were placed with a recent burial. In May of 1954, mass lie detector tests were conducted on La Crosse area high school boys in an attempt to find out more information about Evelyn's disappearance. Though local authorities had planned to test, 1,750 students and faculty, the testing was controversial and was halted after around 300 were tested. And to this day, no clue what happened to Evelyn.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the black shuck. This unbelievable creature is no fairy dog, that's for sure, although those aren't anything to laugh about either. This is the true terror dog, the brutal, big, bad boy. The canine carnivore fueled by carnage. A hate-eyed and vengeful black dog full of rage and malice. There are all sorts of variants based on where you are, from the Gargas to the Guy Trash to the Padfoot, but the one best known could be the black shuck. Take one look, and you're out of luck. Some say that this thing is the embodiment of Satan. Wherever it goes, destruction follows. A harbinger of doom with blazing red eyes. If you see one, you're supposed to hide or make sure not to look at it. If you neglect to avert your gaze, your luck will get so bad that you will die within the year. There's one tale of a Suffolk church that tells of a black shuck visit back in 1577. The enormous dog came running in, killed the man and boy, and caused the steeple to collapse through the roof. Then it left in a hurry, leaving dark scorch marks on the door. And that was just one little tale. Even if you are a dog person, you don't want to run into one of these. Something tells me a treat won't smooth things over. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Tsuchigumo. Monsters have been mashed for as long as we can remember, and it's not always a graveyard smash, mind you. Sometimes it's the combination of many real, living creatures to make something extra nightmarish. This is a beast with the body of a tiger, the limbs of a spider, and the face of a demon. Part real mammal, part real, albeit much smaller arachnid, and part mythical monster. Apparently Tsuchigumo were known for eating travelers as they made their way across the countryside. In the remote fields, no one can hear you scream. 1 or 2 traveling morsels wouldn't be enough for them either. In one tale, a powerful warrior took one down and sliced it open, to loot the body. This ancient hero was playing Dungeons and Dragons way before anyone else, setting the stage for countless boss encounters. This thing definitely reeks of big bad guy, although I don't know what kind of DM would unleash such a presence on Earth. Back to the story though. Inside the Tsuchigumo were 1,990 skulls, 10 shy of 2,000. Unbelievable that it would eat so many and barely even digest the skulls. It's a little wasteful if you ask me. Coming in at number 3, we've got the Alp. This creature originates in German folklore and can cause you all sorts of terrible problems. Some liken it to a vampire, others to demons like the incubus. It will visit people at night and sit on their bodies, although they don't usually attempt to initiate sexual acts like incubi and succubi. If the person doesn't wake up, the Alp will often hop into their dreams and control what they see. It's not common for them to give people good dreams either. Nope, it's nightmares end to end. One of the many sleep paralysis demons that exist, the Alp tends to want to cause mischief in as many ways as possible. So it's not necessarily going to kill you or end your suffering anytime soon. It wants to keep the party going. Dream visits and nightmare manipulation are only part of what makes an Alp scary and annoying. It drinks blood from people's nipples and plays all sorts of heinous pranks, from spoiling milk to rediapering babies to tying up horses' tails into knots. These little gremlins are indeed the worst, and they can shapeshift too, so don't expect to just see a little goblin hopping around. It might be a little trickier than that. Don't count on reading Nilbog backwards to save your butt either. What a bag of fun they are. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Jormungand. This giant snake lives in the ocean surrounding Midgard. It is so large that it encompasses the entire world and then eats its own tail. As I previously mentioned, it's the sibling of Fenrir, which is kind of odd considering that one is a wolf and one is a snake, but hey, Loki definitely got around. Jormungand is famous for its rivalry with Thor. The two would engage in many legendary battles over the years. One of said tales has Thor fishing in the sea for the serpent. He snags it and starts pulling. As it gets closer to the surface, the giant Mir becomes terrified. He sees Jormungand dribbling blood and poison and decides to cut the line, sending the snake back down into the depths. Thor was not happy about this development. Later on, of course, the two meet during Ragnarok. One telltale sign that Ragnarok is coming is the violent unrest of the seas. This happens because our slippery pal here has released his tail from his mouth and begins to flop onto land. Once this happens, it will spit poison to fill half the earth. The snake and the god do battle, with Thor emerging victorious but then succumbing to poison. Lose-lose, fellas, that's not how we wanted this to go. Another fun fact about this gigantic serpent is that continental Germans used to attribute earthquakes to its movements, which is especially terrifying in context. Imagine you're a German peasant and an earthquake rolls through. Your house, rubble, your wife pancaked, your crops shaken, not stirred. And what explanation do you have? Oh, a snake bigger than anything you could ever imagine. Cool. Good. Glad to know that there's something just slithering around beneath us and could surface at any moment. Definitely not living the rest of my peasant life in crippling fear. And at number 1, we've got Balor. When your people have an eternal, mythological, supernaturally powerful enemy, life can be rough. Dealing with the leader of said eternal, mythological, supernatural group of entities can be really hard, and that's what Balor is. Leader of the Fomorians and a malevolent force beyond comprehension, this enormous eyeball has been described in myths and legends passed down from the first Celtic settlers. This demonic tribe constantly showed up, bringing the deadliest of natural forces along to cause doom and destruction all throughout Ireland. Plenty of battles were fought between these demons and the folks who just wanted to keep existing, but the deadliest of all is Balor. A gigantic fiend with strength beyond measure, Balor was a sight to behold. However, you didn't want to look directly at him. He had an enormous eyeball, rumored to be poisonous, that would turn the tide of any skirmish. It was so big, in fact, that it required a team of servants to manually open and close it. Anyone who he pointed said humongous eyeball at would perish, and this became a keystone weapon in the Fomorian arsenal. For ages, these demons dominated the Celtic settlers, forcing them back and preventing them from truly taking hold of the land. However, there was a prophecy that did not bode well for the demonic tribe. Apparently, his grandson would one day strike him down and dethrone the Fomorians in one decisive blow. This giant eye did everything that it could to prevent this from happening though. Hiding his daughter away to prevent her from ever bearing children, Balor was careful not to let any grandchildren make it onto the scene. However, a priestess managed to sneak a human hero into her quarters and this man seduced the woman, resulting in triplets, only one of which survived. And wouldn't you know it, the surviving sibling grew up to be the heroic Lou Lamfada. Lou was an ace with the good old slingshot and managed to get his granddad right in the eye. There's something about slingshots and giant eyeballs in mythology, eh? This bullseye was enough to down the legendary giant, forcing the rest of the Fomorians back into the sea, finally freeing the humans from years of terror. We haven't heard much from them since, so maybe they're waiting for another leader with a power as strong as the poisonous eye. But in the meantime, things seem to be pretty good in Ireland, you know. For now.
Coming in at number 5, we have Nucalavi. The Nucalavi is a winter monster who dwells at the deepest depths of the sea. The monster is a type of demon. Its appearance is that of a horse, but it has the upper body of a man coming out of the middle of its back like a rider. The arms of the man-like part of the animal are large and drag along the ground with the head rolling back and forth. The man part of the beast is limp and lifeless. For the majority of the year, this demon is trapped in the sea by powerful sea spirits, but during the winter, it is able to rise from the water depths. The creature has no skin. All that you can see on the surface are muscle and veins. The horse mouth breathes a powerful toxic vapor. This vapor causes the living to become ill and for crops and trees to wilt. Anywhere the beast goes, a drought will follow. The demon is so dangerous, many people are warned to not even say the name. If it was to be mentioned, it was to be in hushed tones, followed by a prayer to protect you from the beast finding you. Well, I wish I knew that before I was saying its name at the beginning of this number. Some say the creature is responsible for all the great plagues and when people are having trouble with their livestock or harvest. If you were to see the creature, it would begin to pursue you. Once you have looked at it, there is no escape. It will be relentless in its pursuit of you. It does, however, have one weakness. As a creature of the sea and of sickness, it is unable to stand on or cross fresh water. The only escape is to find and immerse yourself in fresh water, so it has no way to reach you. Once you have done this, it should give up its pursuit. Coming in at number 4, we have Yuki-onna. Yuki-onna is a Japanese spirit. She is a deadly monster, also referred to as Snow Woman. It is believed that she was once a beautiful young woman who was traveling in winter. She was hit by a heavy snowstorm and perished. It is said she now brings storms and freezing temperatures with her. There have been many different stories of people having interactions with her spirit. Some say she appears to travelers to lead them astray. She offers to guide them through the storm to safety, but then leads them deeper into the storm so they pass away due to the extreme exposure to the cold. Others have seen her with a child in her arms known as Yukinko. The child wears a straw snow cloak that is traditional in Japan. Yuki-onna will freeze anyone who attempts to take the child from her. Sometimes she even goes into people's homes. She will burst open the doors and open the windows. She'll bring the storm into their home to freeze them in their sleep. The reasons for her attacks are unknown. Some say there is no reason, that her actions are random. Others think she is not aware of her actions. She was simply cursed by the storm that took her life. There is currently no way to escape from the Snow Woman. There are stories of her showing mercy and sparing people, but why she does this we don't know. The best way to stay safe from her is to avoid any extreme weather conditions during winter, or you might just get to meet her yourself. Coming in at number 3, we have Chenoo. Chenoo bears some similarities to the Wendigo. It comes from the Wabanti tribes of the northeast of the US. The thing that many people find terrifying about the Chenoo is that it was once human. A Chenoo is created when a human being commits cannibalism, or if they refuse to help feed someone who is starving. This then causes the human heart to freeze and turn to pure ice. Once this happens, they begin to change into the Chenoo. Chenoos are giant compared to their original form. Once transformed, they look like a wolf-like man with chunk of flesh missing from their body, where they have eaten parts of their own flesh. It will often camouflage itself to blend in with its environment in the forest. It will stick fallen branches and leaves to its flesh. Their home is in the mountains of the far icy north. They will only venture down to the forest when hungry. They'll often come across unsuspecting campers or lost hikers. They take many lives during the winter due to tourists visiting for the ski season. Once someone has been turned into the Chenoo, there is still hope for them. There is a special medicine known only to the local tribes. If they drink it, they will vomit up the heart of the ice, and of anyone they may have consumed, and they will turn back into a man. The only other way to stop a Chenoo is to trap them. Often it's impossible to save the person they once were, as they rescue to drink the medicine once transformed. They are powerful and angry creatures. They can be almost unstoppable if you had to face them in combat. Once being human means they have the same intelligence as we do and cannot be tricked like you might be able to other beasts. The tribes often told the story of the Chenoo during winter when food was hard to find and they would often not have enough to go around. It was to deter them from turning to cannibalism to survive. Fair enough, just don't eat people. Coming in at number 2, we have Ijark. The Ijark is a powerful spirit. The story goes that they were created when they wandered too far north. They went to the coldest northern point they could reach. They say that they ended up getting caught between life and death. While they were trapped within this void, they became a shapeshifter. Having crossed the veil of the living, they were able to bend it to their will. The only thing that the shapeshifter cannot change is their blood red eyes. This is the only indicator that the person is an imposter who has changed into their current form. Its true form looks like any usual person until you see its face. Its eyes and mouth are sideways. It's said that if you were to look at it directly, it will disappear, but people have seen it from the corner of their eyes and have been able to create a description from this. It is said that they target unsuspecting travelers. They will disorient them so that even if their destination was in sight, they would become lost and led far away from the path they were on. It is said they would often create and live in colonies together and will confuse those who track them down to stop anyone from entering their territory. Sometimes, however, when they choose, the living does enter their realm. They will drag the living to the realm of the undead. Many people will have had an experience with these beings and never knew it. They leave you stranded with memory loss. You will suddenly feel lost, unable to remember where you were heading in the first place. Do you think you have met one before? I probably have. I've been around. And finally, in at number 1 we have Yeti. The Yeti, or abominable snowman, is probably the first thing that you will think of when it comes to frozen creatures. Mentioned a lot in popular culture, the Yeti had quite a name for itself. Although many say that it doesn't exist, there have been many times when it's caught on camera. The creature is tall, is an ape-like being. It comes from the Himalayas in Nepal. It's covered in soft white hair, like fresh snow, as to blend in with its environment. It is known to attack if humans come across its habitat, or even wanders to local towns. The old tribes of the area used to worship the Yeti as a spirit of nature protecting the mountains. The creature is terrifying to encounter with large teeth and claws. While stood up, it towers over all the animals and humans. In the 20th century, there were many reported sightings of the creature. People were increasingly making attempts to scale the mountains to catch a sight of the Yeti. People found strange tracks or saw the creature from afar. One team even brought back hairs they claimed belonged to the animal that they had found on their investigation of the mountain. In the 1950s, the United States thought that finding the Yeti was so likely that they created a permit that you could obtain if you followed the rules it had in place. The first was that you were not allowed to look for the Yeti unless you had a permit, and the government knew when your expedition would take place. The second rule was that you were not allowed to harm the creature unless in self-defense. The third was that the Nepalese government had to approve any news reporting on the animal's discovery. Many people today still go looking for the creature, since hundreds of people go missing in the mountains each year. It's not something I would recommend any of you do. I mean, they could just be going missing because it's cold, you know? Bit of a chill.
Number 5. Our first story was shared to Reddit by a user named Girl Porker, and is a story that'll have you uninstalling Snapchat if you haven't already. One day, Porker received a message from a contact that he didn't recognize. The snaps were innocuous enough, a little, hey, how are you? So he assumed it was a friend messing with him on a new account that he didn't know about. The account told him he should try out a new Snapchat lens called Eyes of the Underworld, which shows you the other world hiding beneath our own. Porker installed the lens and ran it through a bit, describing the lens as a pretty simple effect, saying it just distorts whatever is on screen and adds a few flickering sprites and shadow effects to the background to give off ghostly vibes. Porker assumed it was just, I don't know, marketing stunt for something, advertising something. But Porker said that a few days after, however, he'd noticed that he was sleeping a lot worse than he ever had in his life, complaining that he was having these violent, turbulent dreams where he was being pursued by shadowy figures that dragged themselves across the floor. This recurring dream happened to him 3 or 4 times. He said the dreams were stressing him, but what was really scaring him was how when he woke up, he would notice he had scratches and bruises that he couldn't explain appearing all over him. Porker said he was definitely getting scared and even considered looking into finding an exorcist just in case what he was dealing with was a true supernatural threat, which, understandable. I think if I woke up with scratches all over me, I'd assume demons were involved, or my cats. Porker smudged his house with sage and attempted to clean his house, but said that this only made things worse. And he started to hear growling late at night and experiencing intense bouts of cold sweats. And in extreme action, Porker destroyed his phone. He filled it to bursting with orange juice to fry the components and hucked it into a river to free himself. Miraculously though, it seemed to work. Porker said that after that the nightmares stopped as quick as they began, and all it cost him was a new phone. I would have tried a factory reset personally before chucking it into the water, but hey, we all have our methods. I don't think a ghost can survive a factory reset. And hey, if you're looking for more ghost stories about creepy technology and all sorts of twisted things out there, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. If ghosts aren't your jam, we got aliens, we got cryptids, we got conspiracies, we got true crime, we got fake crime. Basically, if it freaks you out, we got a video or 2 on it. So hit subscribe, please make sure to hit that little bell as well, and I know this is a big ask, would you kindly do that at the end of this video, because I got 4 more scary Snapchat stories for you coming up right now. Number 4, the AI. This story was posted to Reddit as well. Recently, there was a new feature on Snapchat, which was that there was an AI that can talk to you. One day, I was in bed asking it absurd questions. Are you human? What is God to you? That's a very esoteric, absurd question to ask an AI. What is God to you? That is poetic. That's beautiful. It started to say, I'm sorry, I don't have access to this. I don't know where you are, and messages saying, it's just an AI and can't answer those questions. Can any of us answer what God is to us? Hard to ask an AI that. I had an idea to ask it to give me a location nearby. I sent that message knowing it was going to say it doesn't have access to where I live, yada yada yada. Here's a random location near you. It was a random set of coordinates. I copy and pasted the coordinates and I was shocked and confused that it was a field in Nebraska, my home state. I asked how it knew my state, but it said it didn't have access to my location. Days pass and I become bored of the AI, but the thoughts of these coordinates stuck with me for a few days until I knew I had to find the location. On a Saturday when I was off, I drove up to the location. I put the coordinates into Waze and drove where it told me to. And this location was in the middle of nowhere. I stepped out and followed my phone, and I was in a plain field with absolutely nothing. No houses, no buildings, no one. I looked into the distance and saw a small hill not too tall, and I thought that had to be it. As I walked towards it, I asked myself, was I expecting gold or cash? I felt embarrassed of all the time I was wasting here. I began to walk back until I heard faint cat noises, meowing. I turned behind and was shocked, and I walked back to a tunnel. This tunnel was covered in graffiti and it was too dark to see, so I shined my phone's flashlight. Right in front of me was a long, fleshy, skinless creature. It didn't look like it had eyes, but its mouth was a nightmare. It had rusted teeth and fingernails, and it stood there with its arm mangled. I ran back to the car. The next few days I couldn't sleep. I messaged the Snapchat team about finding illegal stuff, but I knew no one would believe me. I was so confused about how the AI gave me coordinates there. I tried to forget all about it until the next few weeks I started to see talk around town about missing construction workers all near a sewer. Blech. Number 3, the stalker. Michael Melanson is a former Marine and foster parent living in a small community in California called Kings Canyon. While checking his Snapchat messages, Melanson noticed something unsettling. Among these usual snaps was one that stood out from an unrecognized username. Intrigued, Melanson opened the snaps unsure what to expect. What he saw made this fully trained Marine chill. The message was a picture of Melanson with an unnerving caption saying, "See you soon." More pictures would get sent showing places on Melanson's daily routine. His gym, his favorite coffee shop, a close-up picture of the street sign where he lived. I would probably block that guy and actually chuck my phone into the river. I think that guy from 2 points ago had the right idea. But Melanson reached out to the authorities. It seemed like the Marine had a stalker. The police had advised him to save and document all of the messages as evidence, and they launched an investigation, although little came of it. Surprise, surprise. The snaps continued and grew more invasive. More photos of the neighborhood and frequent hotspots. It reached its peak when one of the photos was that of Michael inside his own home. Michael then fitted his house with security cameras and confided with friends about what was happening. He became hyper aware of his surroundings, constantly pinging and scanning for any threats. The stalker seemed to have calmed down and the messages were dwindling out. Was it over? If only. Eventually, the police were able to track the IP to a location nearby. The subject was a disturbed individual with a fascination with Melanson, a young man by the name of Riley Poeta, who worked at the bowling alley Melanson lived below and frequented and did most of his business in. He was taken in. The story is a modern-day horror movie plot, a reminder that not everyone in your neighborhood is as friendly as you might want them to be, and with the right information, anyone can get a hold of you. Truly spine-chilling stuff. Number 2, Thomas Sparks. Thomas Sparks was an amateur athlete who used his Snapchat mostly to highlight his athletics and daily vlogs about his life. A gymnast trying to attain as many world records as he could, and he might have broken the record for most haunted Snapchat story out there. Dubious one. Listen to the story he posted to Reddit. One day while browsing the app, Sparks uncovered a filter he hadn't seen advertised anywhere, which allegedly would show supernatural entities on camera. A joke, obviously, just meant for fun, sounds fun. Sparks uploaded a few videos showing off the filter, thinking it nothing more than a game. But as the days went on, Sparks noticed that even when he wasn't using his phone at all, he would occasionally catch glimpses of ghostly figures in his vision, vanishing when he tried to meet them head on. Sparks attributed it to working out maybe a little bit too hard and not getting enough rest and not drinking enough water. Stay hydrated. If you learn anything from Top 5 Scary, stay hydrated. Sparks said that after about a week after installing the filter, he began hearing faint whispers when he was alone in his bedroom, and even reported that some objects seemingly were moving on their own. A lamp moved across his bedroom, things not being where he'd left it. Sparks was growing incredibly paranoid, I think as most of us would be if we invited a ghost into our home. Thomas contacted Snapchat support, but unsurprisingly, they didn't have much to offer for him, instead only giving a generic message stating that the filter is just a playful feature and the company doesn't take any responsibility for any paranormal hauntings that could occur as a side effect. Well, they probably didn't say that, but hey, have you ever read all of Snapchat's terms and conditions? That might be in there. Nobody's gonna sit down and read all that. They might have something about ghosts. Out of ideas, Sparks deleted the app from his phone and claimed that he'd stopped experiencing any of the paranormal activity that was bugging stalking him before and has since not used the app whatsoever. What do you think, gang? Was Sparks telling the truth? Did he unintentionally become a conduit for spiritual activity? Or is he taking home a gold medal for creative storytelling? You tell us. Also, shout out to this guy just deleting the app. Everybody else went through all this like hullabaloo, but he was the only guy who just figured out like, oh yeah, I'll just get rid of this. Seems way easier than anything else. And finally, number 1. Snapchat stories can be a very mixed bag. There's good odds most of what you'll see is just sponsored junk, ads for IGN, models doing their thing, you know. But every now and then you come across something that catches your eye and hooks you in. Maybe too far. That's what happened to James Brett Varney, an educator from Moncton, New Brunswick. Varney reportedly, while scrolling through stories, clicked on one from a profile he hadn't heard of called Unknown Realms. The story in question was a series of random, quickly edited, unsettling videos. Cryptic symbols, unintelligible writing and sounds, and quick flashes of people in dark robes surrounded by candles and ominous objects looking like a deleted scene out of Eyes Wide Shut. Varney was naturally unnerved by what he had seen, but brushed it off, assuming it was probably just, you know, promo for some sleeper indie horror A24 hit that your friends are all gonna say is really good, but you're never actually gonna watch. As time went on though, Varney found himself thinking more and more about the flashing images, saying that it felt like it was a dream replaying in his head over and over, and it was bothering him infinitely more than some stupid little Snapchat story should. He kept coming back to it to watch it over and over again to see if there was anything he missed. He said he felt like it was an invitation to some cult. He researched Unknown Realms for a bit, but wasn't finding anything to attach it. No project, no movie, no video game. James went to report the story to the authorities to see if they'd help him, but found that when he did, the video had been scrubbed from the app. Confused, James went on to research more into the phenomena and found others online who claimed to have all seen the same mysterious story. No one was able to get to the bottom of it. Recruitment tool for a clandestine organization? Art project by some bored art majors? We might never know. A reminder that there is so much hiding on the boundless wild west of cyberspace we may never get the answers to. And you know what? That's not such a bad thing. Sometimes some stories are better left untold, some snaps better left unopened. Number 5. The Walking Dead. My first true tale of phantasmic terror comes to us from Reddit user Jalcott. Answering a question posed in the thread, nurses and doctors of Reddit, what's the weirdest and most paranormal thing you've ever experienced? Hospitals already seem pretty haunted as is, so it's no surprise that there was so many good answers. But Jalcott stood out. Take a listen. I'm a psychiatric nurse, and early on in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. One of our residents was an elective mute, which means that he didn't talk, but there was no medical reasoning as to why. He had spoken earlier in his life, and in fact seemed quite normal back then, with the exception of being close to 7 feet tall. He'd been raised in the Deep South and joined the army when he was 19, but one night he vanished. He was declared AWOL, and eventually he was declared missing, and later officially declared dead. However, 10 years later, a 7-foot-tall man walked into a Virginia hospital ER in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist, "My name is Marion Deschênes, and I've been dead for 10 years. And according to the Redditor, those were the last words he ever spoke to anyone. He had shown up to the hospital covered in dust and wearing an old uniform that he'd been wearing the night he vanished. His social security had not been used at all, and he had no ID on him whatsoever. However, via fingerprints, they were able to identify him. The family was notified, but they said they had already grieved their lost man and that whoever was claiming to be him simply wasn't, and asked to never be contacted again." The nurse went on to add that Marion would pace all day, every day, moving his mouth in a way that looked like he was muttering to himself, but nothing came out when he moved his lips. He had an unnerving habit of throwing his head back with his mouth wide open as if he was laughing hysterically, but not so much as a breath could ever be heard. The nurse said she tried talking to him almost daily, and he would appear to listen, but only react by periodically throwing his head back in that laughter-mimicking way of his. Various medications and treatment plans were pursued, but nothing ever affected him. Therapy was tried as well, but all that would happen was Marion would just grin and start pacing again. She goes on to say that on her last day, she saw Marion pacing in the parking lot, throwing back his head to laugh. She closes by saying all those years she'd wondered, was he a ghost? And all those years later, she still doesn't know. Click through and listen to as many top 5 scary videos as your ears can handle. Moving on. Number 4, things that go bunk in the night. Now you would never ever believe this, but our next story comes from Reddit as well. A similar thread, a similar question. What's the most paranormal thing you've ever experienced? Lots of good ones to pick from, but this one from Mad Rampager really stood out for me. I used to be in the military. The training camp bunk that we lived in was said to be haunted. Occasionally, our stuff would go missing and reappear in weird places, like under our bed or inside a bag that we'd zipped up and stuff. No big deal, right? Weird things happen, and I mean human error and all that. Well, then came the instance that freaked everybody out. It was night after lights out, and my friend was on his phone texting his girlfriend. Most of us had been drifting off to sleep and we were lying on our beds when suddenly my friend heard the shuffling of feet from the corridor. So, thinking that it was our sergeant, he quickly hid his phone under his pillow, rolled over on his side, and tried to get to sleep. What happened next still chills me to the bone to this day. While he pretended to sleep, he heard someone right behind him at the other end of the bed saying, "Don't worry, you can continue to pretend to sleep." I could have dismissed this as a figment of his imagination, except me and 5 other people around him heard it. Creepier still, there was no one there. And weirdly, it sounded like the voice of a young girl that had said it. For reference, our camp was in the middle of an island and was set up away from the main admin building. The island had been closed by the government for army training purposes for the past 15 years, so there were definitely no civilians around, let alone any children. To make matters freakier, when we came back from our weekend home leave, there was a bunch of hair on his bed, neatly bundled up, long and jet black, and underneath his pillow was a note. Remember me? Now, as I said, we're in the middle of a forest, in the middle of an island, and at that point in time, there were no female recruits whatsoever on the island. Our bunks were locked for the weekend, and the duty sergeant had no idea what had happened. We never spoke about it again after that night, and it still chills me every time I think about it. Number 3, old friends. Our next story is from a Reddit thread asking, "What's your ghost story?" And I gotta point this one out just because it was too funny, but the original poster included the title in brackets, "Serious?" to deter any would-be paranormal pranksters. Just serious ghost stories, please. Luckily, Redditors obliged. User Barbed Cats shared this terrifying tale. When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I see someone on the side of the road flagging me down. Up in the North Woods, no one ever leaves someone else stranded, and it would turn out that the guy standing there was somebody I'd actually been to school with, my old friend Jim. Jim gets in the car and we start talking, catching up. I hadn't seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe just a little bit older. We get to town and I ask him if he wants to come to the reunion with me and have a drink. He says no, just take me back home. Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks from my grandmother's, and I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the part of town that really was just the outskirts, up by the fairground and the cemetery. There was a mobile home park out there, and I figured that must be where he lived. When we reached the end of the turn, he said, "Just drop me off here. It was nice to see you again," and he walked off into the night. So I went to the high school reunion, met up with some old classmates, and we start to talk. Now please understand me here. I am stone cold sober, nor do I ever take anything harder than soda. Tired after a 13-hour flight, but I was completely sober. As we were talking about who was showing up and who wasn't, I mentioned to my old classmate that I just picked Jim up a few miles off east of town and had dropped him up by the fairgrounds. Now for some reason everyone got really quiet. Even the guy belting out karaoke stopped, and my cousin went white as a shirt. Barb. Jim died 8 years ago. Rolled his car. I start to feel really dizzy, and I go out to the car to take some deep breaths and decide whether or not I'm going crazy. And there on the seat was a newspaper printed 8 years ago containing Jim's obituary. I still have that damn paper. Every now and again, I take it out to stare at it, and I still wonder just what the hell happened that night. Number 2, Ghost on the Line. The next story comes to us from a thread asking law enforcement officers of Reddit, what is the creepiest call that you've ever been on? We got a very creepy answer from user Smokey Bonaparte sharing this creepy little tale. The Redditor writes, 911 dispatcher calling in. We received a call from an elderly lady who had trouble breathing. I had taken several calls from her before and her husband in the past, so I recognized the voice. I dispatched an ambulance to her residence and held her on the line trying to keep her calm while the ambulance was responding. Ambulances advised that they had a 15-minute ETA as she was in a very rural part of West Virginia. I'm talking to her just about her husband and how she was doing, and just making pretty standard small talk with her. The ambulance arrives and I let them know that she is in severe respiratory distress, and I still had her on the line. I let her know the ambulance is coming to her door to go answer the door, and she says okay and hangs up the phone. Oh, that's pretty normal, right? Well, here's where it gets very weird. The EMT and paramedic on scene call back about a minute after, and they say that no one is answering the door. We have a sheriff in the area pulling on scene about that time. The sheriff unit confirmed the address, and he's breaching the door to make access to the PT. 5 minutes go by, and the paramedic on scene radios to ask me who called. I tell them it was the elderly woman who lived on residence. He tells me he's going to call this in and he needs to speak with my shift supervisor. We get him over to the supervisor, and the supervisor confirms the same information I relayed, that it was all correct, and asks what's going on. Apparently the old woman had been dead for a while and was already in full rigor mortis. They thought I was wrong on the caller, but the other dispatchers played it back for them and confirmed it was the old woman who called. The ambulance transferred the hospital and we got the same calls and disbelief from the doctors. But I took a call from a ghost that day. Number 1, uninvited guest. Closing off our list is this story which chilled my spine like Sub-Zero. Coming to us from user Parole Model, which, hey, by the way, love the pun. It was from an Ask Reddit thread asking, what's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Lots and lots and lots of good ones, but this one took the cake. So lend an ear. I used to visit my friend at her house out in a rural farming area before she moved. I'd sleep over a lot and we'd just hang out and draw. I usually slept in the living room and on the couch, and there were 2 mirrors in the room that were fairly close to the TV. When the TV was off and I was walking by, I started seeing shadows move behind me. I thought it might just be something off the TV screen, and then one evening I walked into the living room to get my sketchbook so I could sketch in her bedroom. I bent over and picked it up, stood up straight, and I looked in the mirror and saw a man behind me. A man standing in the hallway leading to the living room. He was average height, bald, and a bit old. I turned to look at him and no one was there. I turned to look at the mirror again and he was gone. I felt more than a little spooked. Another time we were just sitting in the living room and we heard what sounded like a kid's footsteps running across upstairs quickly. She had 2 adult siblings, but they were out at work leaving us all alone. Around that time I decided to sleep in my friend's room instead of the living room, only to wake up in the middle of the night to see 4 posters slowly get peeled off the wall. No, it wasn't just them falling and dragging each other down. It looked as if someone was carefully unsticking the tape and removing them. The next morning my friend put them back up saying, well, I need to get some better tape. She and her family eventually moved out because they couldn't afford to keep living there anymore. We'd never really talked about anything that had happened in that house, as if talking about it might actually make it worse. But after she moved, I finally confronted her and said it. I said, dude, your house was haunted. I hope you knew that. She replied, yeah, we knew it was. Some guy and his granddaughter used to live there, but he took her life and then took his own. So it was probably them or something. I never told you because I didn't want to scare you. Later, she would dig out a copy of a news article she got from a local paper about the crime. The picture that went with the article was the exact man I saw all those years ago. Number 5, hit and run. A hit and run is probably in the top 5 lamest things that can happen to you. Simpsons Hit and Run, however, fantastic. Someone hits your car and then doesn't have the decency to pull over and check in on what's wrong. Even more frustrating is to know that you'll probably never get to find out who did it unless you have the army of the internet on your side. A Reddit user named Meatheaded had experienced a hit and run and, frustrated and at a loss, turned to Reddit to try and find some answers with what little evidence he had to offer. When he posted a picture of a broken headlight to r/what is this thing, he probably didn't expect as much of a response as he got, as it was kind of an odd question. But some 400 comments later, and Redditors had managed to accurately find the model of the car down to the make, model, and year, and all of this just off of a bit of broken plastic and glass. Meatheaded then took the information and ran it through a database and found a 91 gray Cadillac that had been reported stolen. Meatheaded sent the data over to the traffic crimes unit of his local police department, and were able to corroborate the data to track down the missing car and the suspect. Again, all just on a blurry photo of a broken headlight, which is downright incredible. Not only did they manage to find the car, but they also managed to connect it to a theft, busting 2 crimes with 1 post. Most Reddit posts don't get nearly that lucky. At most, you're getting a few upvotes, not solving a crime. And if you've got a love for scary videos, my friends, let us know. Subscribe to catch more of them every day, twice a day. Let's keep going. Number 4, phone scam. Now, not every crime has to be a grim one. Sometimes it's as simple as helping somebody get out of a scam. In 2019, an anonymous Redditor posted a complaint to the Reddit Bureau of Investigation subreddit, complaining that he had been scammed while trying to sell his phone privately. The Redditor had been in a bad situation, in dire straits, needed some quick cash, and was selling off an old phone to someone he'd met on a local listing site like Craigslist. He met the customer, who asked to meet late at night. Not thinking too much of it, the Redditor obliged, only to have his phone swiped quickly, and when he noticed the money he'd been given, he'd noticed that it was all counterfeit bills. Frustrated and scammed, he was helpless with no idea what to do. A Redditor reached out to the original poster and helped them track the number that he was given to contact the scammer. They searched through and found that it belonged to a 75-year-old man who didn't quite add up. So they did some more digging, and they found that the man who owned the phone number had one relative who happened to share a name with the scammer. Through more digging, the OP and Reddit discovered that the man had been arrested previously and had a suspended driver's license. Kind of amusingly, the original poster went back to the police with all this new information and discovered that the detectives had copied down the numbers of the scammer down completely wrong, so they were never going to be any help at all. 2 days later, they called him into the station to look at a lineup, and they'd found the phone scammer. His grandfather had been paying it off, and the relative he'd been looking into was the scammer's father. The detectives thanked him for his time, and they charged him with criminal fraud with the intent to deceive. The OP got it solved, he got the phone back, and the scammer got charged. And you got to hear about this story in this lovely video. So, win, win, win. Number 3, hit and run again. In August of 2018, a woman went out for a bike ride and tragically was struck fatally during a hit-and-run accident. There was nothing to tie a perpetrator to the scene, no cameras, no footage, no security footage. The only evidence that the police had found was a small black fragment of the vehicle that had struck the bicycle, but it looked indescribable. Not knowing what else to do, Washington State troopers tweeted out a picture of the fragment in a desperate attempt that maybe the internet's collective hive mind might be able to help them identify anything since, well, they were plumb out of ideas. The post eventually made its way to Reddit, posting to r/whatisthisthing, and we know from a couple minutes earlier in this video that r/whatisthisthing is really good at identifying random car parts left behind at the scenes of hit and runs. Well, lo and behold, the Reddit intelligence once again took care of the impossible, and within a while, the unlikely hero named Jess Nuts posted that it was part of a headlamp of an '88 Chevy Silverado. The Redditor clarified that he was a Maryland state inspector for years, and part of each of his inspection process was a mandatory headlamp adjustment. So he explained that he has seen a lot of headlamps in his time and immediately recognized what part of the car it should have belonged to. With this tip in hand, it was only a few days later, on August 14th, 2018, where the state troopers tweeted out that they were able to make an arrest after Reddit users identified the broken car part, leading them to the driver, who was swiftly apprehended. The driver had been driving very tired, allegedly, and didn't look back after he'd hit someone because he didn't want to see a body. Not really a great excuse. He was sentenced to 4 years. It may not provide all the closure for the family, but thanks to the help of some Reddit detectives, the case was able to be closed and some justice was able to be served. Number 2, Jane Doe. In 2014, Reddit user Call Me Ice shared a story about an unidentified set of bones lying in a cemetery in Strongsville, Ohio. The user was researching another cold case at the time, amusingly, and was searching for genealogy records and came across the unidentified skeleton and became very intrigued by the mystery. Why was there never an effort in over 40 years to make an identification as to who these bones belong to? Wishing to right a wrong, Call Me Ice posted to r/unresolved mysteries in the hopes of getting some resolved mysteries. The Strongsville Jane Doe, as she was known, was first found in 1975 by 3 boys who were exploring a nearby forest. They found a skeleton lying on a sandbar, mostly intact, but missing some of its jaw. Naturally, the bones were reported, and it was thought to belong to a woman estimated aged 18 to 25 who had suffered a fatal gunshot approximately 5 months before being discovered. Detectives at the time checked her across several missing women cases, but were unable to make any connections or draw up any significant evidence, and the trail went completely cold for decades. Until 2014, when Call Me Ice started to look into it. Call Me Ice got in touch with the cemetery and managed to get access to the original autopsy files and a photo of the skull. She sent it over to a digital reconstruction artist, who then made up a mock-up. Now, nothing too much happened for a while, until in 2016, the forensic artist who had done the reconstruction came across a listing on the NamUs website, that's the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, of a woman named Linda Pagano, who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances around 1974. She'd come home from a concert and gotten into an argument with her stepfather and supposedly left to go visit her mother, where she was never seen again after. The forensic artist then contacted the medical examiner's office and pulled Linda's dental records, and wouldn't you know it, she matched the Strongsville Jane Doe to Linda Pagano. Although the identity of the attacker was never found, the family was able to find the smallest closure in finally knowing what happened to Linda Pagano, and it never would have happened without a Redditor bringing it back up. Number 1. The Grateful Doe. One of the more notable examples of Reddit solving a cold case was a 20-year mystery as to identify the body recovered from a car crash that was too damaged to be identified. In 1995, a Volkswagen van was found crashed into the trees off of a highway in Virginia. The driver was able to be identified, but his passenger unfortunately wasn't. A pair of Grateful Dead tickets in his pocket led to him being dubbed the Grateful Doe as a pseudonym. For 20 tragic years, the man was never identified, and the case was completely cold, with nary so much as a link. Until a Redditor caught wind of the case and was intrigued by it and opened it back up herself. The user then made a subreddit specifically for this case called r/Grateful Doe, and suddenly there was all this renewed interest from the greater collective of people working pro bono to try and find any connections they could. Digital reconstructions of the face, composite sketches, all this. Eventually, this caught the attention of someone who was sent an image of one of the composite sketches and said that it looked identical to his old roommate. After getting in contact with the roommate, he pointed the subreddit into the right direction, saying that the Grateful Doe's name, he thought, was Jason Callahan. Reddit then tracked down Shannon Callahan, Jason's half-sister, who upon seeing the composite sketch was moved and offered to take a DNA test. The DNA test confirmed everyone's hypothesis, and after 2 decades, an ice-cold case with absolutely no leads was able to be closed, and Jason's family finally got a little bit of relief to know what happened to their missing relative. The subreddit Grateful Doe is still active and now serves as a hub for several other cold missing cases, with others frequently being solved every day.
Number 5 on this list is Unresolved Mysteries. Unresolved Mysteries is a subreddit that is exactly what you'd expect based on the name, a bunch of creepy and scary mysteries that have never been fully resolved. Now, I've always inherently understood that law enforcement isn't perfect and that things fly under the radar that we don't know about and might not ever find out. Criminals get free and crimes remain unsolved for years, and that's just something that we sort of need to accept. However, looking at this subreddit just makes you understand how many crimes actually go unsolved, and the number, it's truly unsettling. So many of these posts are of people being murdered, disappearing, things being stolen, criminals breaking out of jail, all of these unlawful actions that have just never been solved. Like, I guess I'm okay with a few crimes not getting solved, but this is actually crazy, guys. Now, granted, there are some things on here that are just kind of cool mysteries, like artifacts that have gone missing and stuff of that nature. But most of the posts here are super dark and really make you question the law enforcement that we have in place right now. Just scrolling down through this subreddit, here are some of the topics that I'm talking about. We have assassination, then we have skeletal remains getting found, then we have a Jane Doe being found, and then it's a disappearance, then it's 6 unresolved murders. Like, this is some seriously dark stuff, guys. Honestly, I'm not praying before I read this subreddit, I'm just praying in general that law enforcement can start solving some of these things. Number 4 on this list is 2-sentence horror. 2-sentence horror is a subreddit for those of us with particularly short attention spans. Considering I fall into that audience, this subreddit really spoke to me. The rule here is pretty simple: give a horror story in 2 sentences. Sounds impossible, right? Well, you'd be surprised how scary some things can be in just 2 sentences. Let's read off a couple. List Dexit12345 writes, "For 3 weeks I was trapped in that cave, forced to eat my friend in order to survive and see the sun just one more time. As I looked at the sky, there was a searing pain and then a darkness I would never escape from." Shouts from both sides says, "I heard a loud crunch as the dentist was performing my clean. He started screaming at whatever had hatched in my mouth, lashed out at him." Puzzle-headed by 9973 says, "You said I want a lifetime supply of chocolate. This is only 1 chocolate bar." I said to the person running the contest, "I meant your lifetime," he said, pulling a gun out of his jacket. So yeah, that's the type of stuff that we're dealing with on this subreddit. Out of all the ones on this list, I find this one to be the least scary and kind of the most entertaining. If I had to recommend you check out any of them, then this would probably be my subreddit of choice. Number 3 on this list is the glitch in the Matrix. The glitch in the Matrix subreddit is a subreddit where people share extensive stories about how we could potentially be living in a simulation and how they have witnessed a glitch. These things can get very weird, and if you believe the stories that are here, then they truly make you question your actual existence. We're talking about time loops that people get stuck in, things glitching positions, people teleporting to different places, things going very wrong that defy the laws of physics and are very reminiscent to that of a video game just totally glitching. Let's read off one of these glitches to give you guys an understanding of what I mean. This one comes in from Ragnar, and they say, "Alright, so this is a very minor glitch, but it's messing with my head, so here you go. The other day I had my younger sister and 2 nieces over for dinner. While eating, I took a picture of us all and then took another picture maybe an hour later while sitting in the living room having dessert. Now on the first picture, my sister's shirt is very clearly a peach pink color, but on the second picture, it's a dark mint green / turquoise color. Now I confirmed with everyone that she did not switch shirts, and you can clearly see that it's the same one / cut. I thought maybe the phone camera was off or there was a filter causing it, but everyone else's clothes look the same, so that doesn't make any sense. None of us have any idea how she's wearing different colored clothes in these 2 pictures, so who knows, maybe I've had my first real glitch." This is a super minor glitch, but it's things of this nature that just don't make any sense at all. If you actually believe what these people have written, then it really does start to make you wonder, are we truly living in the Matrix? Number 2 on this list is Creepy Wikipedia. This subreddit is definitely up there as being one of the weirdest online. The whole goal of this subreddit is to find the creepiest and scariest Wikipedia pages in the world and then share them with the world. Wikipedia pages that frankly we probably don't ever need to see. Let's just go down a little rabbit hole here of Wikipedia pages that you might find if you visit this subreddit. Well, let's see. One of the first thing that pops up is this horrifying Tenor Life airport disaster where we learn about how 583 people died in a plane accident where 2 747s crashed into each other in Spain. Or we can learn about how an innocent man, Timothy Evans, was hung after the British police in 1950 completely botched an investigation and convicted the wrong guy. Then literally years later found out that they messed it all up and got the real serial killer. Or if I'm feeling super dark, guys, then maybe I'm interested in this Reddit title, which reads, "The Shijon family was a gang composed of South Korean working class people who literally ate the rich. Their hatred for the rich was so extreme that they would kidnap, assault, and cannibalize them. One of them told reporters that their only regret was not killing more rich people." So yeah, this subreddit is pretty dark. The scariest part about all of this is that these are real events. Wikipedia can't always be trusted for all of the details, but for the most part they're pretty accurate, and the 3 events that I brought up are all real things that did happen at one point or another. This subreddit is basically one of the darkest and scariest places to learn on the internet. If you just want to learn about death, hatred, and atrocities, then this subreddit is for you. Frankly, I'm not that way inclined, and as much as I don't want to be ignorant to what's happening in the planet or what has happened in the past, I'm also not trying to surround my brain with that much darkness and violence. Number 1 on this list is No Sleep. No Sleep is the subreddit everybody thinks about when we're talking about creepy experiences on Reddit, and for good reason. This subreddit is filled with extensive tales of paranormal and creepy experiences people have had. Now I should note that most of the stuff posted on here is fiction, but every now and again you run into what someone claims to be true. Even these fictional stories are super scary though. These tales are typically very long, and therefore I won't be able to read out an entire post during this tiny little entry. However, I will read off the first section of this one story by Feathers and Fire. They write, I lazily flick the last watched video away, a cat wearing a helmet fashioned out of a melon, and a live feed takes its place. It's dark, with torches or headlamps making almost a strobing effect in some crusty old building. Ghost hunters or something like that? Not my thing. I raise my finger to scroll again, but at the last second, something catches my eye that stops me dead. The camera pans past a black and white framed photograph on the wall. It's my grandparents on their wedding day. I sit stock still, watching intently as the camera moves forward. I would recognize that photo anywhere, having examined it countless times as a child visiting their farmhouse. It was my favorite picture out of any hanging on their walls. Now that story, as you can guess, probably doesn't end as a fun and warming tale of this person's grandpa and grandma. It was a very well written post for sure, and gets very dark and scary very soon. If you decide that you want to read the full thing, then just be aware that you may not be getting a ton of sleep tonight. Just a warning.
Starting off 5th place strong, we've got a narrowly avoided death. This tale takes place when long-term nurse Jenny was placed in charge of caring for an elderly woman with no family who was admitted to the hospital when her husband passed away. She didn't speak often, but when she did, it was usually just words that made no sense together. Jenny felt bad for her because ever since she'd arrived, so many of the residents in her area that she, seemed to enjoy spending time with had passed. She put up a picture of each of them next to the pictures of her husband and several others who were probably just family to remember them. Being an extremely empathetic person, Jenny felt sorry for this woman and strived to give her extra attention whenever she could, and formed a bond with the lady. It just seemed so unfair that she had, such luck and kept losing people that she cared about. One day she looked at Jenny and said, plain as day, "Sweetie, I think I'm done now," and handed Jenny a picture. It was a picture of Jenny, and she smiled because it touched her heart that she was so important to the old woman. She passed nearly a week later, and poor Jenny cried for days from the loss. The old lady knew it was the end, and she said goodbye as best she could. Now fast forward to just under 2 years later, when Jenny was talking with a colleague, and that old lady came up in conversation. Her colleague referred to the lady as that crazy, explicit word for a female dog, which seemed very out of character for her, and it shocked and offended Jenny deeply. She expressed this to her colleague, not so nicely, and the lady looked at Jenny with a shocked look and said, "Oh dear, do you not know?" And then proceeded to explain something to Jenny that, she in fact hadn't known. As it turned out, it came out sometime after she had passed that the old lady had killed her husband by poisoning him, and that there was an investigation because it appeared that she had a ritual of befriending someone, obtaining a picture of them, and hiding the picture until she could kill them, usually by poisoning, and then displaying the picture as some sort of a trophy. It was suspected that this may have been the reason for the spike in mortality rate during her stay, and the considerable amount of photos in her collection. The last Jenny heard, the old family photos weren't any relation to the old woman, and the police were trying to ID the individuals and compare them to several cold cases. Sheesh. Thank goodness Jenny survived to tell the tale. In 4th place, time to tell the tale of a rocking bed. Nope, not a rocking horse, rocking chair, or like an ottoman. A bed. I know water beds are out of style and like a major safety hazard, but maybe this could inspire them to come back. New nurse Demi was working one of her first ever overnight shifts when a relative of one of her patients raced into the nurse's station, out of breath, screaming that she needed to come quick. Unable to elaborate, saying Demi had to see what she was talking about for herself. Our nurse made her way to the room in question, where this little old lady patient was crying and holding onto the bed for dear life, all while her bed was shaking extremely violently. Now, you're probably thinking that the lady was the one causing all that shaking, but apparently she was this frail, practically emaciated older lady who didn't even possess the strength to rattle the rails. The ward only had 2 other patients in it, and everyone in there was huddled in a corner, shaking in fright until it eventually subsided. Apparently that particular ward was rarely used, and the bed that the old lady was in was used even less. People who have laid in it complained of nightmares where they hear screams and laughter of angry children. I guess some restless spirit called dibs on that particular bed, and Demi would very much like it to pick somewhere else to hold court. Please and thanks. In 3rd place, we have the case of purple scrubs. Former EMT David O'Keefe worked mainly in transfers, and this particular client was always his last one of the day, having to return home late at night in the dark. She was an older woman who visited the hospital he was based out of for regular dialysis treatment. One specific day, she was being moved, and David was sitting in the back of the transport vehicle with her. She looked under the weather, so he asked what was wrong out of concern, and she said a man in purple had been visiting her. He asked if the man was, like a relative or a technician. but she shook her head. She said the man would sit next to her during dialysis appointments and stroke her hair. Thinking this was strange, right after he dropped her off at the hospital, David asked the hospital techs about, such a person, but no one had seen or remembered anyone wearing purple. Visitors also weren't really a thing at this part of the hospital, so he assumed the patient was just imagining it. While he was waiting to bring her back home, he saw the man in purple scrubs waiting outside that woman's room, watching her door. As David went to approach him, a bunch of tech personnel urgently ran past them into the woman's room, and David lost sight of the man. It turned out the woman in the room had suffered a heart attack and was sadly unable to be revived. Oh, and just a tiny creepy footnote, none of the staff in that hospital wore purple scrubs. In second place, we have a mystery mimic. Yeah, I'm fond of alliteration. How can you tell? This spooky story comes to us courtesy of former late night transportation worker Betty. She worked the position for a few years, but after this incident, did everything possible to never work a nighttime shift ever again. The transport home base was in the basement of the hospital, where all laundry was done and all supplies were sorted and housed. On this particular night, Betty was the only one in the basement when she heard whistling at the end of the hallway by the elevator and poked her head around the corner expecting to see her only coworker on duty that night, but there was absolutely no one there. And so, she shrugged it off. That night in particular was slower in pace, so she opted to take a snack break and veg in the break room for a bed, when she heard a loud bang out of nowhere. Betty walked into the hallway and a bed was rolling down the hall, bumping into the sides of the walls. Now at this point, she assumed that her coworker was playing a prank on her, and she directly radioed him to chew him out, but he swore he was upstairs. Honestly, I'd be assuming the same. I've had a similar situation in a haunted house I used to work in at an old theater, but Betty was smart about it and determined to catch her coworker in the act. She started walking down the hallway, and as she passed the laundry room, all the machines started up. She poked her head in, expecting to find him, but the room was completely empty. Just a tiny worrisome spooky flag. Nothing to worry about, right? As she walked into the laundry room, the machines came to a complete stop. Betty froze at first before regaining her senses and making her way towards the elevator, when she heard whistling from the other end of the hall. Now at this point, she's certain that she's the only worker in the basement and is repeatedly pressing the elevator buttons in an attempt to rush it. As she was waiting for the elevator, things started falling off the shelves down the hall. Betty could only stare in shock as boxes of gloves, tissues, and packages of tubes fell off various racks one by one. Her entire body broke out in goosebumps, every hair standing on its end, and the feeling of being watched had completely consumed her thoughts. When the elevator finally arrived after what seemed like forever, Betty felt the sensation of someone brushing her arm and screamed in panic. Upon exiting the elevator upstairs, she made a beeline for the cafeteria, where her coworker actually was, and broke down explaining the entire ordeal. Now, before y'all ask, but Alexa, how was this spirit a mimic? Turns out that Betty usually whistles to herself at work at night, chats with the laundry folks during daytime shifts, and the items that fell off the shelf slowly were common items that she would have to retrieve. Yeah, big note for me on this one. In first place, we have terrified security staff. Security guard Mason claims that while he wants his location to stay anonymous, he used to work overnight security in one of the largest, best, and oldest hospitals in the USA. He and his fellow security officers all have stories about one building in particular, which was built in the late 1800s and was the original psychiatric building for this hospital. Now, being the late 1800s, not much was truly known about psychiatric disorders at that time. On top of that, this hospital was known for its medical research. Sadly, with what we all know about history, when you combine the two, that spells out a lot of nightmares. A couple years before Mason started working security there, this building in particular had been converted partially into offices after the newly built part of the hospital had dedicated a section for the updated psych ward. Mason's rounds for the first night of our tale happened to include, yep, you guessed it, that building. At night, this building was empty, due to most of the staff who worked in those offices leaving by 5 p.m. every day. Apparently some folks like to rush home, which is fair, but they would leave their office doors unlocked, which was a big no-no, due to medical information being located in their offices. Big confidential stuff. Kinda want to keep that locked up. It was security's job to go to each floor, make sure every door was locked, and if it wasn't, to secure it themselves. Mason did his initial sweep of the building to make sure it was clear of people, and then proceeded to do door checks. The hallways were pretty narrow, so he could check both sides of the hallway's doors at once. At the end of this hallway, there were 2 sets of doors you had to go through to reach the final office, which was a dead end, so you had to come back out, go the other way. He noticed everything was secure, so he was ready to move on to the next floor. He exited the 2 sets of doors from the dead-end office and froze at what he saw. Every door that he had already checked was completely ajar, and set so perfectly so that their own weight wouldn't cause them to shut again. A single wheelchair had appeared at the end of the hallway and was facing towards the steps. Mason had heard other security officers outright reject that set of rounds due to the strange stuff that was happening, but he originally laughed it off until that night. He went around and forced the now open door shut and tried to shrug it off. Nothing else weird happened that night, and he returned the next night to patrol the miners' ward. The area was just under construction, so security was needed to make sure nobody got hurt by accident and all the workers were doing their job. Safety first. When Mason was hanging out in the break room before his shift officially started, other security guards were discussing various reports of seeing a young human with brown hair who would disappear randomly, and Mason dismissed this as just gossip meant to spook off the newbies. An hour into making his rounds, a foreman who had stayed late called security and asked for a security officer to come up because, quote, a youngin' with brown hair had locked himself in a room and he didn't want him to get hurt with all the open wires in there. Mason answered the call, went and unlocked the door for the foreman, and looked in a 20x8 room for about 10 minutes, and upon seeing no one, called it in as a false alarm. He attempted to shrug it off until he received a call for backup in the psych ward, and when he arrived he noticed a patient was in a state of panic near the remnants of a shattered chandelier. Now, before he had experienced the abnormal happenings in this building, Mason claims he would have written off his testimony as idiocy, but the patient claimed that something held him in that spot as the chandelier started swinging wildly until it started to fall. When it started to fall, he was let go and allowed to move, and scrambled out of the way before it hit him. Now, this was the beginning of the end for Mason, who requested to be transferred to hospitals the next day. And as much as I love the Phantom of the Opera, I don't really want it to become reality. One of my favorite things to say in accordance with that is that I love one fictional toxic tenor, and only one. Emphasis on fictional.
Number 5 on this list is El Chupacabra. You guys should know who El Chupacabra is by this point, considering we've talked about this creature tons on this channel before. Basically, it is a legendary creature in the Central Americas that's said to drink the blood of livestock. Although this creature seems like it's probably fake, it might be real, just not exactly how we might expect it to be. Carolyn Beccia says, we are taught from an early age, don't approach scary looking dogs. And while no one can get a clear picture of Bigfoot, the Kraken, or the Loch Ness Monster, there is one monster that is oddly not camera shy, the legendary El Chupacabra. The Chupacabra was first sighted in Puerto Rico in the 70s. A wave of sightings followed in the late 1990s. During this time, livestock throughout Puerto Rico was found drained of blood. These Chupacabra, or goat sucker attacks, caused panic with local residents who claimed a vampire was feeding on their livestock. Although descriptions have varied, most describe a hairless, alien-like monster with spikes going down its back and glowing red eyes. It sounds dubious, but how could so many people be taking pictures of the same ugly dog-like creature? The answer may be one found in science. One plausible theory is that these creatures are coyotes suffering from sarcoptic mange, an inflammatory skin condition caused by the itch-inducing parasite mite scabies. Wolves, dogs, and coyotes infected with scabies will have extreme hair loss, skin shriveling, and constricted blood vessels that can lead to life-threatening fatigue. And while usually a coyote or wolf will have no problems hunting prey, once infected by sarcoptic mange, coyotes may choose to hunt more available meals such as livestock. So it's actually possible that this creature is real, it's just not what we thought at all. I know that this takes away from some of the mystery and lore around it, but ultimately this would make a lot of sense. When you think about it, what's more likely? A space alien comes crashing to Earth and starts sucking the blood of our livestock, or some coyotes get a disease and start doing it instead? I tend to side with the coyotes. Either way though, that doesn't make these coyotes nice or friendly or approachable. Still treat them like you would a chupacabra, with caution. Number 4 on this list is the Stymphalian birds. We gotta go all the way back to ancient Greece for this one. Caroline Beccia says one of Hercules' labors was to kill the Stymphalian birds, man-eating birds who had the peculiar habit of throwing dung. The Greeks were not the only ones who liked to scare their youngsters with killer bird tales. The Maori tribe of New Zealand told similar legends of the pokie or haikoi, a giant black and white bird that swooped down from the sky to pick off small children. Scientists today know that these thunderbirds existed. Called Haast's eagle, the bird stood over 6 feet tall and had a wingspan of over 8 feet. The Haast eagle would sit atop trees and then ambush its prey by swooping down at 60-mile-per-hour speeds. Then it would disembowel its meal with sharp talons before the poor slob could even worry about dung throwing. Hercules would never have survived these hellbirds, but you can sleep well tonight. The Haast's eagle went extinct around the 15th century. Anything that could annihilate Hercules would definitely be a no-go for me, guys. That dude was literally a demigod, and if these guys could have beaten him, then we wouldn't have stood a chance. Lucky for us, they are extinct now, but for the people back then, they would have had their hands full with these creatures. If, of course, they still had hands and the beast hadn't ripped them off yet. Number 3 on this list is the Kraken. We have one of the most famous folklore creatures here, guys, that as we know now, turned out to be real. The Kraken was especially big in Norse culture. All of those people up there in the Nordic regions feared this wicked beast, as it was said to be able to pull down entire ships with hundreds of men on board. Instances where exactly that happened did actually transpire. Ships with tons of people on them that were literally made for battle would be out on the water, and then boom, Kraken attack and they're toasted. Except it wasn't really the Kraken now, was it? The Kraken looks very similar to an actual animal that we have in our world that is also super deadly and really strong. The giant squid. Giant squids, in case you couldn't tell from the name, are giant. They're pretty big. They are so big, actually, they would have had the capability to take down an old ship like this. In fact, we've even seen these beasts do some serious damage to submarines, and they're made of metal. They easily could have sunk a wooden boat from hundreds or thousands of years ago. And if you were a sailor on said wooden boat and you saw this massive creature with several tentacles sucking you to the bottom of the ocean, then you would probably exaggerate what happened as well too. It's very easy to see how the legend of the Kraken got started and started to snowball as more encounters with the giant squid happened. I'm glad that the Kraken isn't technically real, because the giant squid is already bad enough. Number 2 on this list is the Charybdis. What was initially thought to be a folkloric creature may have been real, but not exactly in the way that we might think. Caroline Beccia says, nothing is more frightening than being sucked underwater by a whirlpool that feeds on human flesh 3 times a day. The Charybdis first appeared in Homer's Odyssey. During this epic tale, Odysseus must sail between the 6-headed sea monster Scylla and the flesh-eating whirlpool Charybdis. These 2 dueling sea monsters attacked in intervals, much like a whirlpool's regular intervals of tidal activity. It sounds terrifying, but whirlpools that pull ships underwater really do happen. Known today as Garofalo, one is found in the strait between Italy's mainland and Sicily. Garofalo occurs when winds blow across the strait in opposition to the tides. This makes it technically not a whirlpool because there's no circular motion, but it does have the ability to wreak havoc on ships and pull humans into a watery grave. So this deadly creature was real, it just ended up not being a creature at all. Back in the times when these stories were written, there would have been many folklore legends about evil sea monsters that could pull brave sailors into the sea. The reality of the situation is, though, that the ships we had back then kinda sucked, and it was a lot easier for the weather and other conditions to sink the ships. That's why there were so many legends of monsters coming from the ocean for so long. Finally, number 1 on this list is the Incubus demon. This demon is an evil demon who is thought to sneak into your home and have sexual relations with you as you're sleeping. This creature is real in a sense. It just so happens that it's actually in our minds. During the witch hunt craze craze of the 16th and 17th century, people had some really messed up ideas on how human reproduction occurred. One way was for a demon to steal a man's seed and impregnate a helpless woman during her sleep. The monster that stole the precious sperm was called a succubus, and the monster that implanted the sperm was called an incubus. The incubus would sit on top of your chest while you slept, making it impossible for you to move if you woke. Sort of like being assaulted by a possessed sexomniac. But before you condemn medieval people as crazed horn dogs trying to attack innocent women, there is a scientific basis for believing in such monsters. The condition is called sleep paralysis. During sleep paralysis, you are fully awake but cannot move or cry for help. It feels like you've had a stroke, but although it's terrifying, sleep paralysis is harmless. Most sleep experts attribute it to being caught between REM, rapid eye movement, and NREM, non-rapid eye movement sleep. Either way, before sleep stages were understood, we can see how our ancestors would have thought it was a demon sitting on your chest. So literally, this demon creature that apparently attacked people was never real at all. It just felt extremely real from our minds. I've experienced sleep paralysis before, and although I didn't experience any demon thing, I can 100% see how people would have believed this back then. It could definitely have felt like that and would have got people on the lookout for this sick and twisted demon of the night. Number 5 on this list is the El Culebron. I'd never heard of this legend before, and I have to admit that it's pretty cool. This creature is native to Chile, and although it'd be pretty neat to look at from afar, it's definitely very dangerous. Scoop Whoop says El Culebron is basically an enormous hairy snake with a gigantic calf-like head. It's said that the creature resides inside of dark caves or remote forests, and it eats basically anything in its path. Legend also has it that the snake can draw wealth to anyone who's able to domesticate it, but trapping a culebron is no easy feat. You have to find one in the wild, pluck 3 of its longest hair strands without getting eaten, and then put it in a bowl of milk. From that bowl, 3 baby culebron will spring to life, and the strongest will eat the other 2 and become a full-fledged culebron. From that point forward, owners have to maintain the snakes with sacrifices of animals or close relatives and leave the blood in a secret location that only the snake knows of. A very unique legend, if you ask me. A very deadly, giant snake creature that has the ability to bring you great wealth, but only if you can breed one and domesticate it. The story that I read off doesn't go into deep detail on how they actually bring you wealth, which would definitely be of interest to me. Maybe they're kind of like truffle-sniffing pigs, except instead of truffles, they can smell gold or rare gems or something like that. Probably the reason that we don't know for sure how they bring us wealth is because so few have actually been able to be domesticated. First off, finding one of these creatures would be very hard, because it means you'd need to trek through the jungles and mountains of Chile. Then, after finding one of the rarest creatures in the world, you also need to fight one of the most deadly creatures in the world and pluck 3 hair strands off of it. Then you need to fully domesticate another one of these beasts in your home after you grow it from a bowl of milk. There is a lot of room for error here, guys, and I doubt that many people have been able to complete all of the steps. Keep an eye out though for the El Culebron if you find yourself in Chile. Number 4 on this list is La Llorona. La Llorona is also known to many as the Weeping Woman. She is the ghostly apparition of a vengeful spirit who roams around by the water bemoaning the loss of her children whom she'd actually drowned herself. Scoop Whoop writes, according to a popular version of the tale, the Weeping Woman was once a beautiful maiden named Maria. She married a nobleman and gave birth to 2 sons. Her husband was a traveler and he rarely visited home. During their time apart, his feelings for her began to dull, but her husband still loved his sons and gave them all the attention that he left his wife bereft of. Once when he was in town, she caught him with a younger woman. Enraged, she took her sons to Santa Fe River and drowned them. She also was found dead on the riverbank a few days later, the cause of which remained unknown. It's said that when she reached heaven, she was denied entry until she found the souls of her sons. Thus, she wanders the earth looking to reclaim their souls. Dressed in a white gown and mourning for her sons, La Llorona takes lost and abandoned children and drowns them in hopes of recovering souls that will allow her entry into the afterlife. What an absolutely horrible woman. Clearly killing her own children really didn't teach her anything at all, because now she's out there killing other people's children. This is a really scary legend in Mexico, and it's often why parents don't let their children go to areas with water by themselves. There's also the fear that La Llorona will be lurking somewhere around there, thinking that she can use the souls of the young children instead of her own. You'd think that she would have realized by now that faking the souls of other people to get into heaven isn't gonna work, but by the sounds of it, she really doesn't sound like the brightest bulb in the bunch. Bright or not, she's still very dangerous, so be very careful whenever you're around water in Latin America. Number 3 on this list is La Ciguepa. La Ciguepa are interesting mythical creatures that are located in the Dominican Republic. They can be found in forests and around the rivers and lakes of the country. At first glance, they may look like a woman with long hair. However, upon closer inspection, one will see very unique characteristics. Their backwards facing feet. That's right guys, their feet actually face towards their own body, and this is one of the main differences between this creature and your standard human. Many people haven't paid close enough attention to this detail, and because of that have been tricked into thinking that this is an actual woman. A fatal mistake if one of these things decides that you'd make for some good prey. The typical target of this creature are men that find themselves exploring the forest. These creatures are said to be incredibly smart and can often outwit the people that they run into. Also, rather surprisingly, their backwards feet make them run very fast, so even if you do catch on to this creature's intentions, running away would be very hard to do. The earliest mention of this creature was back in 1866, and since then there have been many stories written about these creatures. Those lucky enough to have an interaction and then make it out alive have documented their findings and tried to warn others from wandering into the forests unarmed. Sadly, these warnings aren't always heeded, and many men have disappeared over the years, never to be heard of again. Trekking through the lush forests of the Dominican Republic is already dangerous as is and requires lots of planning. Just don't forget to also plan for the La Ciguepa if you do find yourself in this country. Number 2 on this list is the Yakumama. Ever seen the movie Anaconda? 1997 movie with J-Lo and Owen Wilson, all about a super massive snake that starts hunting this filmmaker? Well, I wouldn't be shocked if that snake was based off of the legend of the Yakumama. Cryptid Wiki says the Yakumama is a large snake up to 60 meters in length that is said to inhabit the Amazon River basin. Local shamans say that the Yakumama travels to an area called the Boiling River. In the local legends, the Yakumama is said to be the mother of all marine life. It has the ability to suck up any living thing that passed within 100 paces. The locals would blow on a conch horn before entering the river, believing after hearing the noise, the serpent would reveal itself if it was in the area. I can't describe to you guys how massive 60 meters in length would actually be. Titanoboa was an ancient creature that actually existed in the Amazon. It was a massive snake, the biggest the world has ever seen, that ruled over these parts and could swallow crocodiles whole. That creature at its max would grow up to 50 feet in length, or 15 meters. So basically, Yakumama is 4 times the size of the biggest and deadliest snake that's ever lived. This thing would be able to annihilate hundreds of humans at once. Even if the locals did blow on their conch and the snake did reveal itself, then there would literally be nothing that they could do. It would just eat them all, and that would be that. Snakes are super cool, but not when they're 60 meters long and looking to devour me. Number 1 on this list is the Puchin. Puchin are very dangerous and deadly beasts and should not be underestimated under any circumstances. Cryptid Wiki says, the Puchin, a creature from the Mapuche mythology and Chilote mythology pertaining to southern Chile, was a feared shapeshifter which could instantly change into anything. It's often been described as a gigantic flying snake that produced strange whistling sounds, while its gaze could paralyze an intended victim and permit it to suck its blood. It's often been reported as sucking blood from sheep. The creature can be eliminated by a maki. So Maki, in case you aren't familiar, are medicine women, and they're believed to be the only people capable of defeating this beast. Meaning that you could be the strongest warrior in the world, you could have taken down beasts and enemies in the hundreds before, but you would still fall to the Puchin if you weren't a Maki. It's extremely hard to kill something if you can't even look at it, and that's what this is like. Similar to Medusa in the way that it can paralyze you if you look at it, fighting this beast is near impossible. Aside from its ability to paralyze people, it's also extremely fast, extremely strong, it can fly, and it can also shapeshift into other dangerous creatures. Pray that you never run into this creature, because it will assuredly be the last thing that you ever do.
In at number 5 we have Ong Babi. The Ong Babi is considered to be the Vietnamese version of the boogeyman and is said to have originated in the 17th century. The story of the boogeyman is told throughout the world in many different ways, but in Vietnam it's the Ong Babi that brings fear to children, and parents use it to scare their children into behaving. Many parents in Vietnam threaten their children saying things like "stop crying" or "Ong Babi will come and take you," or "eat your broccoli" or "I'll call Ong Babi." The boogeyman in general doesn't have any specific appearance, and conceptions vary drastically by household and culture. But the Ong Babi is described as an old, rugged man carrying 3 sacks, has 12 eyes, and he likes to kidnap naughty children using and putting them into his sack. When looking at the personality traits of the boogeyman, they are divided into 3 categories. One being the kind that punishes misbehaved children, the kind that are more prone to violence, and the kind that protect the innocent. They all relate in the same way, being that they all exist to teach young children lessons. And that's why the boogeyman is directly related to Ong Babi, because they are both there to frighten children with punishment and to steal them at night and sometimes even eat them. The Ong Babi only ever comes at night and only kidnaps the children who are misbehaving and not listening to their parents. This so-called mythical creature is said to be invented by parents in order to scare children when they are disobedient and scaring them into having good behavior. Another account says that it was invented based on events happening in the 17th century when starvation ran rapid through Vietnam, and it drove many people into kidnapping children to sell for food, and the Ong Babi is based on those events. Whichever the case, many know these tales regardless of where you're from, and the story of Ong Babi is told by parents to children to this day and is a very fearsome figure to children in Vietnam. Coming in at number 4 we have Ma Da. Children living in areas close to the river are warned about Ma Da, which are vengeful spirits who lurk in the bodies of water. They're believed to be the souls of drowned victims that tend to have a childlike appearance, and they manifest as bloated corpses with weeds for hair. It's believed these souls died in torment and they cannot find peace and can only be reincarnated if there is another to take their place. The Ma Da roam in lakes and rivers waiting to drag down unsuspecting swimmers, but it's believed that this is most likely made up to warn children to not go swimming unsupervised, because many fatal water-related accidents are very common in Vietnam. Many happenings and stories of the Ma Da come from the infamous Tu Lich, otherwise known as the Cursed River. Back in September 2001, while working to take out some of the excessive mud and trash build-up in the river, a construction team uncovered several wooden piles arranged in a strange formation, including ceramic relics, metal utensils, and even bones from human skeletons. The odd occurrence even made headlines on many different newspapers at the time, but had eventually died down. Several years later, in 2007, the happenings came up again when Mr. Nijin Hung Kwang, the leader of the construction team, recounting many misfortunes that had happened to him and others who were related to the project since 2001. Some of the things that happened to these men included experiencing nightmares in which they were haunted by ghosts, feelings of being drowned, as well as health issues such as epileptic seizures and other accidents happening to the men's families. Mr. Nunjian even invited a monk to perform a ritual to lift the curse on the river, but the attempt was unsuccessful, and the monk died shortly after visiting. In at number 3 we have Khoi Nahap Trong. The Khoi Nahap Trong tend to possess the bodies of the recently deceased. Legend has it that when someone passes away and is prepared for burial, it is extremely important to not let a black cat, which is a symbol of bad luck, leap over the coffin. If that does happen, then the body of the deceased will be infested by evil spirits, which then turns into Khoi Nahap Trong and chases the living. Other stories claim Khoi Nahap Trong are spirits of the dead who prey on the frail, dying people, seeking to consume their souls and steal their bodies so they can indulge in earthly pleasures. Older victims are much easier to manipulate and possess, and they are close enough to death even when they do end up passing away. The Khoi Nahap Trong stays in their bodies and can live on in that body, enjoy their life on earth. When it inhabits the elderly, they seem to appear reinvigorated but also start to act act strangely. Some of the weird things these revived humans do are they ask for lots of food, and very specific foods to feed on, like raw blood and even living animals. These odd behaviors are mistaken for signs of recovery, which why Koinahap Trang can live among the living normally for a few days or even weeks before people start noticing the strange behavior. Obviously, this person is already dead and their body is taken over and possessed by this demon, and the only way for the Koinahap Trang to exit the body is by an exorcism, and then once the evil spirit is expelled, the body will immediately show signs of decay, as if it's been dead for days. Some believe that this legend is exaggerated accounts of the incidents where someone is wrongfully declared dead and wakes up suddenly during their funeral, which is terrifying. In at number 2, Malay. Malay is said to be one of the most terrifying creatures in the Vietnamese folklore. By daytime they are said to walk among us disguised as women, usually looking young, very beautiful, and often appearing tired. I'm always tired. At night, though, it's said that their heads detach from their bodies. They are seen dragging bloody organs alongside them and float around to feast on flesh, organs, and other rancid items. It is also believed that someone whose excrement is consumed by a Malay is cursed with eternal hunger and will eventually die of starvation no matter how much they eat. When sunrise comes, they must return to their human body again, otherwise they'll be burned to death by the sunlight. So the easiest way to vanquish a Malay is to hide their desired body so that she can't reattach her head. Apparently, the Malay story originated from when a woman, believed to be cursed, engaged in various sins and fraudulent activities during her previous life. Then after she died, her sins caused her to be reborn as a horrific demon who lives off dead animals, their organs, excrement, and garbage. There have been many different sightings throughout the 21st century, including strange red lights floating up and down a field in 2016, and then again in 2016 villagers saw strange green and red lights rising up and down in the distance, and people thought it was the Malay due to her glowing appearance when she floats through the night. There have also been videos and pictures seen all over social media believing to be the Malay, showing glowing figures hovering around the night sky and eyewitnesses capturing these sightings, and people have no explanation for them. Similar creatures as the Malay can be seen in the folklore of many other Southeast Asian countries including Malaysia, Thailand, and Cambodia, where they are known as the other names such as Ap, Krasu, or Penanjal, but they all relate back to Malay. And finally, in at number 1 we have Than Trung. The Than Trung are evil spirits who torture the souls of the dead. These spirits usually appear as either massive black birds with blood-red beaks, or they have massive bird-shaped heads with human-like bodies and glowing red eyes. They also have large wings which help them fly, and they stay close to cemeteries and sit on mountain peaks to have a better view to seek out their next prey, and are able to see who is being buried at each cemetery. They often appear after someone passes away and is newly buried, and they show up next to the new grave. It is said that they torture the newly dead people's souls for information about their living relatives, then the Than Trung hunts down their relatives and reap the souls of those living people, leading to several family members dying within a short period of one another. Apparently, the Than Trung must get to the newly buried person within 49 days or they cannot summon their soul. There is even a horror game that came out called The Death Than Trung, which is based off the folklore and was created and developed by Dong Si T and some member of Team Dut in 2021. The game is a first-person psychological horror adventure game that is highly inspired by the demon folklore. The game revolves around the story of a young man who was stuck in an endless nightmare at his inn, and the black and red are the main color tones in the game. It takes place in the city of Hanoi in 2021 and heavily involves the Than Trung and their reign of terror.
Number 5, Patty Donovan. This is a tale from the investigative files of Ed and Lorraine Warren, my favorite paranormal investigators. 15-year-old Patty Donovan came across the Ouija board and decided to use it to find a friend. From the first yes in response to her queries, she was hooked. She spent months falling in love with a spirit she believed to be in love with her, telling it specifics about her everyday life. After a year of telling all of her secrets to the board, Patty had become emotionally dependent on the spirit, asking it one night to reveal her future. During the very long session, it laid out a scenario of Patty's life for the next 6 years, providing specific details, right down to the date of birth of her first offspring, and the fact that she would have a total of 3 spawn by 1978, which is all information that would eventually prove correct. Being as dependent as she was, on the evening of March 2nd, Patty now pleaded for the spirit to manifest. The next morning, Theodore Donovan found the spark plug wires pulled out, the rubber hoses unfastened, and the fan belt cut when he attempted to start his car. And not much later, Patty attempted to start her car, and it was discovered later that the internal engine had been completely disassembled. That week, other incidents of apparent vandalism occurred around the Donovan house. Foundation shrubs were yanked out of the ground, roots and all. On the roof, a 6-foot cast iron pipe housing electrical wires was found bent at a 90-degree angle. On Friday, March 8th, Ted marked 1 flat on the kitchen calendar. And no sooner did Patty get her car back from the shop than one of her other tires lost air. The next next day, being Saturday, her father made the same entry on the calendar, although this time it seemed the tire had been cut with a sharp implement. In the meantime, Patty could no longer raise her invisible boyfriend on the Ouija board. Night after night, she tried to communicate, but the planchette would simply slide over to goodbye. She had no idea her ethereal beau had actually manifested in the form of a supernatural vandal. Like, come on, Buddy goes completely silent and your house starts being targeted by hell demons and you don't pick up on it? By the second week of March, material damage to the house and cars had become so troublesome that Ted complained to the police, who assured him that they'd keep an eye on the property during night patrols. Later that second week, after work, Ted and his wife, Ellen, were sitting in the kitchen with their son Brian when all three heard something smash against a wall somewhere inside the house. Cautiously moving to investigate, they found a gaping 18-inch hole in the plasterboard wall in Brian's room. Just as upsetting was the fact that the jagged edges of the plasterboard were pointing inwards, with the blow coming from inside the walls. Yeah, the evidence is already a mountain for me, but we still have plenty more to pick through. Listening in the dark that night, Ted heard the sound of a board being pried loose, but after checking the entire house thoroughly, found no loose boards. The house was further plagued by loud noises every night that only escalated in frequency and volume, along with further unexplainable damage to the walls. On April 1st, furniture began to levitate, with a 250-pound dresser flinging its contents while flying erratically. Rocks had also begun to rain from the sky, pelting only the Donovan house, which the police bore witness to. Ted eventually broke down at work and explained the horror of his home to his supervisor, who urged him to reach out to the Warrens. Ted instead tried moving his family into a hotel first, and the spirits followed the family there, destroying the room and making so much noise that the family was thrown out of the hotel and forced to return home. Finally contacting Ed and Lorraine, they arrived in Maine as quickly as they were able to, finding the home in complete disarray. Lorraine said nothing, although at the time she sensed in the home the presence of entities so numerous and threatening that she had to fight with herself to keep from going back outside. After a lengthy tour of the house, Ed and Lorraine conducted an interview with the entire family, where Patty's history with the Ouija board was revealed. To that I say, about dang time. The Warrens then contacted the Catholic Church to begin the process for an exorcism, which that process sadly took a month to be granted. The family experienced many more unexplainable horrors during that time, but that alone could fill out a top 5 of its own, so let me know in the comments if you want that eventually. Number 4, the first victim. The board's dark history begins with the strange death of the owner of the original trademark, American entrepreneur William Fuld, in 1927. After acquiring the business from its former owner, a medium named Helen Peters, who sold it because of the serious damage it caused to her family, William built the company into a profitable business. Shortly thereafter, he began to experience his own family troubles that resulted in him cutting his brother out of the company in 1919, and just like my mother and I, they never spoke again. 8 years later, on February 24th, William was on the roof supervising the erection of a flagpole when a support suddenly snapped and he toppled off the building. He tried to break the fall by grabbing onto a windowsill, but the window closed and he fell to the ground, breaking several ribs. He should have survived, but the vehicle hit a bump on the way to hospital that sent a splint of cracked rib bone into his heart instantly. Well then, what a coincidence. After his death, William's descendants took over the company. Catherine and William A. Fuld ran the company until the youngest brother, Hubert, became president in 1942. The Parker brothers acquired the company and all of its assets in 1966, and finally Hasbro took over Parker Brothers, and with it, the Ouija board in 1991. I have no issue with cursing out Hasbro. While they may be great at making board games that aren't cursed, and I'm sure they're profiting on the Yikes fandom that are the adult fans of My Little Pony, they really bungled the years that they held the Disney Princess doll rights, and that's something I'll never forgive them for. Number 3, a long-term buddy. I'm using buddy pretty loosely here. This tale comes from Reddit user Madame Mim20, which I'm hoping is a reference to the Sword in the Stone. During her junior year of high school, she went to a party where the host brought out a Ouija board, and she admitted that she was into paranormal stuff, but didn't know the dangers of, one of those boards. Typical questions were asked, but her vision began to darken, even though the lights were on. The last question being the classic, how old will I be when I die? Everyone got traditional numbers, except for Mim. The planchette moved to 0, and then 1, then 0, then 1, continuously moving between those two numbers until someone just shook the board and said it was being stupid. At that point, she stopped playing, since it weirded her out, and I'm sensing 2 red flags so far. But I'll excuse one of them, since she didn't know the horrors at the time. Mim claims to have a decent ability to sense the unknown, and normally see, beings or ghosts. This one showed up during one of her classes not even a few weeks later. If anyone's getting deja vu, this is reminding me of Patty Donovan as well, don't worry. At first, the ghost appeared like a comforting protector, until he wasn't. Weird things in Mim's home would happen, ranging from drawers opening, whispers, shadows, lights in places where they shouldn't be, and books moving on their own. And at night, it would be much, much worse. He would just stand in front of her door and the fear would ooze out of him as his form would change. Mim had no doubt that he was downright evil, to which I say, no S-H-I-T, Sherlock. She dealt with all of this single-handedly until she moved in with her husband, so I'll give credit where credit is due for enduring that. Things escalated in the now duo's first home together, a small 400 square foot rental. Footsteps, breathing, and unknown whispers became the norm. At the time, her soon-to-be husband was a practicing Wiccan and had blessed most of the home, but forgot about the porch and outer walls, where they would hear scratches on the walls and knocking on the door and windows. Folks had seen her demonic attachment as a shadow and described him as tall and built like a brick house. Also that he felt just outright bad and would always go back into the room Mim was in. Her husband had tried to banish him out and it didn't go well. For context, her husband worked the closing shift at his place of employment and would get home at around 3:30 a.m., which happens to be right in the middle of prime haunting hours. There was a road he would have to take that was very haunted as well, with a history of lots of accidents and right next to a good-sized river. One night he got home looking extremely pale and sweating. Turned out that while driving on that specific road that night, his brakes failed and he couldn't stop. He was going about 100 kilometers an hour, and the wheel began to jerk out of his hands towards the river. He had to use all his strength to keep that car on the road because the wheel was just yanking so hard. To the shock and surprise of no one, the brakes were fine the next day, and ditto for the wheel. This was the final straw, and the duo had a priest bless the entire house and were eventually able to move out of the state and leave whatever it was behind. Number 2, teenage hijinks. This tale comes from a gal named Jenny and also dates back to, well, high school hijinks. She was at her friend's house for a fun summer weekend, and on the Sunday night, they decided to make themselves a Ouija board, taking all the precautions, using a piece of flat plywood, which was laminated with plastic on one side, and using an old glass which could later be discarded. This was the first experience for both of the teens, and they assured each other that they were going to do it properly. No being stupid and pushing the glass around to fool the other. They started off by saying a prayer before asking if there were any spirits present, trying to be specific about only wanting contact with peaceful and good energies and spirits. Here's the thing. You can't guarantee who is going to answer a Ouija board, and evil spirits are gonna lie if they need to deceive you. So while I commend the intent, I'm already sensing a yikes situation. The glass was moving very slowly at first, and they were unsure if it was working or not. The duo asked if there was somebody who wished to talk to them, and the glass moved slowly over to the yes marker. They asked the spirit, if it was male or female, and it indicated that it was female. When asked to spell out its name, the glass first traveled to K, and then to a Y, and then to M, before ending on the center, ergo spelling out Kim. Jenny's friend went white, and it was obvious that he was freaked out. They then asked how she died, and the spirit spelled out car, which further scared Jenny's friend. Next, they asked what kind of car it was that Kim had died in, and it proceeded to spell out Reliant Robin. It was at this point that her friend told Jenny that his auntie was dead, her name was Kim, that she died in a car accident, and she was driving a Reliant Robin. Next, they asked if the spirit had anything to tell them, but it indicated no and then said goodbye. As much as I hate to crush spirits, pun not intended, I doubt that was actually his aunt. Probably just a demonic spirit playing an awful joke, which is something I wouldn't wish on anybody. So next they asked if there was any more spirits that wished to communicate with them. It suddenly got very cold in the room, and the hair was standing up on both teens' necks and legs. This spirit was more powerful, and the glass moved a lot faster. They asked if it was male or female, and it indicated that it was a male. Once again, following a formula, they asked for the spirit's name, and he said he was called Liam. Next, the duo asked for the spirit's age when he passed over, and he went to the 7 and then to the 0, indicating 70. Finally, they once again asked whether he had anything to tell them, and it proceeded to spell out Ollie, which happened to be Jenny's friend's younger brother's name. Her friend then explained that his younger brother Ollie had seen the spirit of an old man standing in the garden some years earlier. They ended their session with another prayer, and while I commend their attempts at making things safe, I hope the spirits that know way too much about them are leaving them alone. Number 1, predicting a death. Heads up, this might be a little triggering for folks, so I promise I won't mind if you hop off now. Heck, the first time I read this story, I got tears in my eyes because it hit close to home for me. Allison was a teen at the time and was at a friend's house for a sleepover when she and her friends decided to play with a Ouija board in the garage. Her friend's mother was at work and her father was in bed, so they had no supervision and decided some debauchery was in order. While playing with the board, they asked if anyone wanted to speak to them and got a yes, so they asked for a name. They got Mom. And when they asked for a message, it said under bridge. No one understood the message at the time. Later, after they had gone to bed, there was a knock at the front door. It was the local sheriff who had come to the house to tell the girl's father that his wife had been in a car accident on her way home from work that night, and her car was found submerged in water under a bridge just a few miles from their home. While I don't believe it was actually the mom communicating over the board, I'm just hoping it wasn't a demon who actually caused harm. But yeah. I don't really have much more to say on this tale, other than I feel like I've had the wind knocked out of me.
In at number 5, we have Grateful Doe. After a fatal car crash in 1995, there was an unknown body found in the wreckage, and this John Doe was wearing a Grateful Dead band tee. People eventually forgot about the case and was deemed unsolvable. The Grateful Doe was an American man who was hitchhiking when he was picked up by 21-year-old Michael Hager, but unfortunately Hager had crashed his van into a tree, and the two men were killed in the accident on June 20 26, 1995 in Greensville County, Virginia. The unidentified hitchhiker was an American man estimated to be between the ages of 15 to 21 years old. He had brown eyes with long curly brown or dark blonde hair that had been dyed red. There was a star tattoo identified on his upper left arm, and he was found wearing a Grateful Dead t-shirt on as well. Investigators had found Grateful Dead tickets in the young man's pocket dating June 24th and 25th. Due to the severity of the lacerations on the unidentified victim's face, mortuary photographs were not released to the public, although a facial reconstruction was later released. In 2012, another facial reconstruction was created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited People. The man who had originally sold the tickets found in Callahan's pocket did not remember the person to whom he had sold them. At least 221 missing people were ruled out as possible identities of the victim. Investigators exhausted all of their resources, questioned everyone they could, and the case eventually went cold and his body remained nameless until 2015. A woman by the name of Layla Betts, a Redditor and Grateful Dead fan, came across the case and began researching and posting what she had found online. The case soon went viral thanks to Layla, and she was soon contacted by one of the Doe's former roommates, who helped her put together pieces of the puzzle and tried to solve the case. Layla found out that Doe's real name was Jason Callahan, and finally this case was solved after so many years. Coming in at number 4, we have the Hotel Zaza photo. In 2013, Reddit's internet detectives swarmed a subreddit for Houston, Texas, after a user by the username Joe Likes Music posted a mysterious thread asking insiders what the deal was with a bizarre hotel room at Hotel Zaza. Right when you walk in, it's not a welcoming room with the sinister paintings hanging above the concrete floor, what looks like a two-way mirror next to a bed that was chained to the wall, and a portrait of Stanford Financial Group president Jay Como, overlooking the whole room. Joe Likes Music's work colleague had booked room 322 and was supposedly told that that certain room wasn't meant to be booked at all, and I can see why. Rather than just saying, oh, it's just a weird themed room, the internet did what it does best and speculated wildly about the contents of the room. Some commenters thought the room numbers corresponded to the Skull and Bones secret society, while others assumed that the whole thing was a marketing scam. Vice got wind of this story and tracked down someone from the hotel to get these Redditors' questions about this creepy hotel room finally answered. Cryer Coots, the Houston hotel's head of e-marketing, brought light to some unanswered questions about the themed rooms and weird paintings. Coots stated that, like the other themed rooms Zaza prided itself on, the Hard Times room is just a kooky take on yet another theme: jail. Coots also said the Zaza collection started in Dallas, where our first property was built 10 years ago. Our owners and president were really the visionaries and pioneers behind Concept Suites, so when the Hotel Zaza Houston opened a few years later, they continued with the same conceptual design. Vice had brought up the theories about the odd 322 room, and Coots states the building was built almost 100 years ago, so when Zaza came in they wanted to use the existing structure. They didn't want to manipulate anything for design purposes. As a result, there are a couple of rooms throughout the property that are more compact. For 322, the idea was just to take a fun, unique spin on a jailhouse experience. So it has an exposed brick wall and a bed hanging from the wall with chains. It's just a fun way to decorate a small space. So there you have it, another mystery solved by Reddit users and internet sleuths. In at number 3, we have 11BX1371. In early 2015, a dark and mysterious video popped up on YouTube, and a Swedish tech blog that created a web mystery and Reddit users wanted to solve this odd discovery. This video was in black and white and 2 minutes in length. It depicts a person wearing what appears to be a plague doctor costume, walking and standing around an abandoned building with a forest visible through the former windows opening in the wall behind it. This creepy video was also accompanied by a soundtrack of loud buzzing noise, and the masked figure holds up a hand with an irregularly blinking light. The film did not have any credits or any claims to ownership, and also contained many commonly used ciphers and encryption messages found hidden in the video and its sound spectrogram, as well as images of tortured and mutilated people. This creepy video soon went viral, and Reddit users started to try and figure out more about this mysterious video. Most of the messages were decoded by participants in an ongoing Reddit thread, and the images sourced to notable murder investigations such as the Boston Strangler. These videos have been interpreted as implying a threat of bioterrorism against the United States, although it has also been speculated that the video is in reality reality a prank, a viral marketing stunt for an upcoming film or video game, or even a student film. Many were trying to find the origin and creator of this odd film, and it was found that John Erik Kreibleichler, the founding editor of the Swedish tech blog Gadget ZZ, received a DVD in the mail of this mysterious video on it, and when he couldn't decode the video, he posted it in his blog. John Erik wasn't the first to make this video public. Internet sleuths soon found a user account identified as AETBK, who had posted it to YouTube. The account only posts on the site. When this video gained traction, this AETBK was identified as Daniel from Spain, and he claims that he was sent this video from a woman he didn't know who told him that she had found it on a park bench. Another earlier version of the video was found posted on the paranormal website 4chan. 3 months after it was released and the most of the hype died down, a guy named Parker Warner Wright spoke to the Daily Dot claiming how he was the guy who created the video. The Daily Dot published an interview with Wright. He told reporter Mike Weiner that he was a US citizen who lives in Poland and that the videos were meant as an art project. After finishing the video in May 2015, he had left 3 copies, 2 on discs in a subway and park in Poland, and the last one posted to 4chan. Without these curious Reddit users, this mystery may have stayed unsolved and the true origin of the video would never have been known. In at number 2 we have WebDriver Torso. In 2014, online sleuths noticed that a YouTube account called WebDriver Torso was uploading with insane regularity, yet none of the videos seemed to make sense. The videos were varied in lengths and consisted with a lot of beeping. Theories about the channel's purpose varied wildly, with some even speculating that it was a government sending encrypted messages for the sake of espionage. However, a now deleted Reddit account had gotten to the bottom of the mystery, linking the channel to YouTube's parent company Google. Google actually eventually responded to the mounting speculation surrounding WebDriver Torso, explaining that the videos were used to determine to what extent the technical quality of videos had suffered when they were uploaded to the site, when compared to the originals. Created by Google on March 7, 2013, the channel began uploading videos in September of the same year, consisting of simple slides accompanied by beeps. It was brought to public attention in 2014 when it became a source of speculation for viewers who discovered it and noted 3 atypical videos featuring jokes, and that's when Reddit came across this and started trying to crack the case. The channel stopped posting videos at its same rate after 624,774 videos as of May 2017. The channel posted a few more videos in May, August and October 2018, followed by uploads in July and October 2019. The channel once again posted a video on November 22nd, 2021. Also, if you search WebDriver Torso into Google, the logo will begin behaving in an odd and mysterious shape-shifting manner. Now that the Reddit thread is deleted, leaves mystery in what Google was really trying to do with these videos, or if there really is a true sinister reason for these videos. In at number 1 we have the identity of the Strongsville skeleton. Back in February of 1975, 3 boys exploring the local woods in Strongsville, Ohio came across a skeleton and immediately contacted local authorities. The police were only able to determine that the cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head and that the body belonged to a white woman around the age of 20, but nothing more was known about this Jane Doe. After the case went cold in 2015, an amateur genealogy researcher was searching through cemetery records in Cleveland when she discovered a listing for unknown white female bones. The woman named Christina Skates began investigating the case herself and uploaded her findings to r/unsolved mysteries and another online forum called Web Sleuths. From there, an artist named Carl Koppelman created a reconstruction of what the deceased woman may have looked like based on images he had seen of the skull. The reconstruction started gaining traction and similarities were made between the Strongsville Jane Doe and a local Ohio woman named Lena Pagano by Carl and law enforcement, which led to her identification in 2018. DNA testing would confirm that the unidentified remains were in fact those of Linda. Linda Pagano was a woman from Akron, Ohio, who had been reported missing in 1974. She had an argument with her stepfather and left home, never to be seen again. Thanks to Reddit and Web Sleuths, this case was solved and the Jane Doe was finally identified and the case could finally be closed after more than 40 years.
Coming in at number 5, bug-eyed. We love a good pun from time to time, but this one might just stick with me for the rest of my life. As a person who's worked at swimming pools and summer camps, I've seen all sorts of different stuff get into people's eyes, from sticks, rocks, chlorinated water, bird droppings, and of course, bugs. Hell, I had a gnat fly into my eye while I was biking just last week. But these are all things that can be removed relatively easily if you're careful. They're not trying to make a home in your ocular orb. This story from Reddit user Oscar Devine makes me want to scream, and you're about to find out why. It goes like this. I've told this story before. I'm an eye doctor and I had a patient come to me with an infected eyelid 2 other eye doctors tried to treat and failed. They were dumping all sorts of medicine into it and it wasn't getting any better. At this point it was swollen and painful for weeks with no improvement despite being on tons of meds. Apparently neither of them thought to flip the lid upside down, you know, the gross trick that some kids do with their upper eyelids. It was a painful maneuver for her very swollen eyelid, which might explain it. Anyhow, there appeared to be what looked like a visible abscess inside the tissue with thick, gooey material. I thought I'd give it a nudge and I saw it move. This wasn't an abscess, it was something else. I managed to remove it quite easily in one whole piece. It was a fly larva. The patient told me that she had a bug hit her in the eye a few days before she got this infection. I removed the larva and within 2 days the wound closed and she was 100% recovered on basic antibiotic eye drops. Yes, I do have the photos for this case for those interested. I mean, I for one am not interested. Walking around with a larva in your eyelid for weeks and not bothering to figure out what it actually was? What if it was like wriggling around in there? What if it decided to start crawling around and looking for food? This is the kind of body horror I would expect in a movie, not real life. Although, what is real life if not horror? Let's keep moving. Coming in at number 4, we've got some unwelcome tenants. This is a personal fear of mine played out right before someone's very eyes. The idea of a silent, sneaky, and altogether uninvited individual deciding that the nooks and crannies of my home are free real estate just drives me nuts. And the worst bit is you're living in blissful ignorance of this until something finally sticks out and other patterns reveal themselves. Those bumps in the night? That wasn't the house settling or whatever other explanation your grandmother might have given you. That was a squatter moving around in the dark. All that food seemingly going missing. It sure wasn't partially forgotten midnight snacks or your friends being greedy, if you know what I'm saying. Those times the motion sensing lights went off in the middle of the night. Not mice, raccoons, or squirrels. Boy, oh boy. User IEAMS85 told their tale in a thread about this particular occurrence. For about a year I lived in a house with 4 housemates. We had a pretty big backyard with a garage and a tool shed that we never used, ever. We also had motion detector lights. 2 of my housemates were very superstitious and believed in ghosts and spirits and such. They also liked to get high on different substances. The lights in our backyard would go off randomly. I assumed it was animals, my housemates were sure it was a ghost. One of them told us she'd seen a man ghost looking through our window when she was high on shrooms. They thought it was scary, I thought nothing of it because, well, yeah. A few nights later, drunk me thought I saw a man through the mesh door to the backyard. I just thought my mind was playing tricks on me because my housemates kept talking about the ghost. Eventually I moved out to go back to my home country and about 6 months after that I FaceTimed with one of the housemates. Turns out we hadn't seen a ghost. A homeless man had been living in our tool shed for God knows how long. Gave me the creeps for sure. All this happening pre-pandemic is horrific, right? But imagine it happening now. You're always home, and they have smaller windows to get out of their hiding spot. What if somebody died while in your home because they couldn't get enough food or couldn't get outside and you didn't even know until you smelled something funny? That's not an experience I ever want to have. Coming in at number 3, we've got pus brain. Not 2 words you really want to see together, right? Well, just listen to this story from user Slappy McSlappenstein. It speaks for itself. When I worked in healthcare, I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department, he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst, but amazingly he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. So take your full dose of antibiotics, people. How are we feeling about this one? A little headache? Checking in on your sinus health? Because that is absolutely bonkers. This dude essentially had to have a brain enema because of the filth built up in his dome. That stuff comes back with a vengeance, like he said, if you're not careful. So listen to your local healthcare worker and finish your antibiotics regimen. Coming in at number 2, we've got the suffocation station. In a lot of creepypasta stories, folks who are left near some dangerous chemical or enclosed space often go mad. You know, self-mutilation, murder, hideous mutations, the works. In this story though, the folks put in an unsafe situation don't end up doing a whole lot of that. They just die, and they die quick. We live in a cruel world, and if the folks running companies aren't careful or tend to cut corners, a lot of bad stuff can happen. Take it from Reddit user animator Spaminator. I heard this from my grandpa. He used to work in the oil/gas industry. His father actually owned the company. Anyways, they had these huge tanks full of some deadly gas that's heavier than oxygen. Some guy went down to measure the size of the tank, suffocated, and died. Another guy found him at the bottom, wanted to help him, and he went down after him, suffocated, died after falling off the ladder down. Third guy does the same. Eventually, my grandpa finds 3 dead bodies at the bottom of a large tank, all having suffocated on this toxic gas. They have vents in these tanks now, which is good. Yeah, the poor grandpa. Imagine strolling into work and discovering not 1, not 2, but 3 dead bodies, all because of an invisible assailant that robbed the oxygen from their lungs. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Outback Backpack Killer. If I was ever to visit Australia, I would be on the lookout for killer animals, bugs, and temperatures. In fact, killer people probably wouldn't even cross my mind. However, as this story shows us, murderous lunatics can be anywhere at any time. User Passometer has this story to tell. I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends, hitchhiking around as many of us have done. One of his friends told him that they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member, and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bedrolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kit and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened, but afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later, the man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. And now this guy has to walk around for the rest of his life with the knowledge that he slept in a death sleeping bag. Definitely the kind of story that ends up as the central focus of a true crime podcast. So the world doesn't look so sunshiny now, does it? After spending about a year or so indoors, far away from other people, some folks might just opt not to return to the planet at large. And after hearing these stories, I don't really blame them. Kicking us off at number 5, we've got r/no sleep. If creepy stories are your jam, then this is the place to start. Creepypasta fans flock to this subreddit to read and write the next generation of scary online stories. As one of the better known freaky subreddits, No Sleep has over 1.4 million subs. After opening its doors about 10 years ago, it's become the premier destination for creatives and spook seekers alike. As the name implies, it's the classic read till 4 AM and then realize it's totally dark and you can't move site. If you want to fall down a rabbit hole of scary stories, this is the place to do it. You read one, and then another, and you keep going until your brain is 100% composed of scary internet stories. This, contrary to popular belief, is actually healthy. What makes No Sleep a special place for campfire story enthusiasts is the set of rules that make it a wonderful community. It's easy to dampen enthusiasm and discourage active posting if everyone's already crapping all over what's being written. So to keep the "this is so fake" crowd at bay, they have an overarching rule. Everything here is true, even if it's not. This makes for more fruitful discussion, keeps ideas flowing, and allows for more creative collaboration. No Sleep is full of well-known online horror gems like The Limping Woman, Search and Rescue, Mimicry, and more. Enjoy your insomnia. Coming in at number 4, we got r/paranormal. Now, if you've decided that fiction posing as reality isn't quite your speed, you can take a trip to the wild world of the paranormal. Investigators and enthusiasts alike gather here to swap tales of spectral encounters and really dig deep into the stories that others are telling. Unlike on No Sleep, skeptics and the totally reality-centric are encouraged to get to the bottom of each post. Nothing is off limits as long as it's relevant and paranormal related. Here, exorcisms and cursed objects are discussed with photos, videos, and written accounts to back them up. Recently, we talked about a cursed statue that first gained notoriety on r/paranormal, which is a primetime example of the kind of stuff to expect. Ghosts, ghouls, curses, cryptids, you name it. If it doesn't fit into the well-established version of reality that most folks subscribe to, you'll likely find it here. Connections between amateurs and experts are made here too. Folks experiencing their first real scare can come to seek advice on how to deal with it, or potentially on how to resolve any number of freaky happenings. And it's not all problems and solutions though. Some topics brought up on this board are actually unexplainable though, compounding the mystery and creep factor. Videos of objects moving when they really shouldn't, threads of crime scene cleanliness experiences, unexplainable security footage, and more await. A very popular, very unnerving category of posts is things kids said. You know, children with knowledge of things that they really can't explain. Past lives, ghost sightings, and more. That's the last thing anyone wants to hear. Portents of doom from innocent youngsters. Hopefully they're not possessed. Coming in at number 3, we've got r/unresolved mysteries. So less mystical and more mystery this time. This subreddit is dedicated to all sorts of unsolved disappearances, unexplainable crimes, unbelievable happenings, etc. If you've ever watched a true crime documentary with a bunch of loose ends, or read up on the many cold cases that are out there getting colder by the day, you'll know what this is all about. People leaving home and never coming back after being sighted outside a sketchy gas station. Families going on vacation and remaining away. Updates on famous criminals who have never been caught, the whole shebang. And while a great deal of the mysteries involve missing people and conspiracies related to the functioning of well-moneyed celebrities, there are also some mysteries that are just plain strange. Prisoners who refuse to disclose their identity to anyone, remaining 100% anonymous. Investigations into the glitter industry. Trying to figure out why Corbin Blue's Wikipedia page is so well translated compared to other more bankable stars. A thread of Redditors who vanished after asking questions that may have hit a little too close to home. That last one is particularly worrisome, especially if you're interested in stuff like this. Speculation is encouraged and folks should be ready to bring in evidence and research if they want to push their narrative. It's stuff like this that opens up whole worlds that you may have never known about, and maybe after falling down the rabbit hole, wish you avoided. I think the scariest thing about unresolved mysteries, though, is the large number of amateur podcasts it inspires. Coming in at number 2, we've got r/let's not meet. Have you ever read the missed connections section of any publication? How many of those do you think ended well? And how many were posted by a creepy guy who thought he was getting somewhere before whoever he was pursuing ditched? Sometimes you might get a ghost world scenario, but how well did that work out for everyone? Not great. r/let's not meet is based on the concept of another similar subreddit called r/let's meet. Basically a giant online classified ad board where folks who are really into an interaction with an individual can try their hand at meeting a second time. Sometimes it's cute, sometimes it's desperate, and often it can get a little weird. The weirdest of the weird might make the leap into the dark side and end up on Let's Not Meet. This is the place to post tales of your creepiest real-life encounters with other people. Let's face it, people are weird and bad. Not always, but everyone's got a story about a person they hope they never see again. Whether it's a bad time at a party or a first date gone terribly wrong, the world is full of freaks and creeps who don't seem to understand how socialization works. Stalkers, peeping toms, and overly aggressive barflies all find their homes here. And what makes it extra disturbing is the fact that people are told not to exaggerate. This is not a place to hone your story writing craft. Instead, it's a place to recount actual events as they happened, which, when you think about it, is much creepier than any scary story. Some of the most haunting stories involve people coming within inches of death. I've seen more than one post about someone being somewhere moments before disaster, running into killers moments before they take down their victim, seeing kidnappers and sexual predators scoping out targets, human traffickers canvassing for their next score. It's terrifying to consider how close we may all be to disaster when out and about. And the tales from Let's Not Meet are a chilling reminder. And finally, at number 1, we've got r/50/50. Heaven or hell, what's it gonna be? 50/50 is basically a long list of high-stakes coin flips. Guess correctly and you're no worse off. Guess wrong and you could be psychologically scarred forever. You're risking your sanity for fun. Each post presents you with 2 options, something nice and harmless or something NSFW or NSFL. I didn't even realize there were tags for things not safe for life. Thank goodness though. Because some of the options on 50/50 are so gross, so repulsive that seeing them could cause permanent damage to a person's psyche. Secondary trauma is real, and if you're not ready, you could be having nightmares for years. Risking it all and running through a few of the posts became a popular pastime and even launched some content creators into the spotlight. Infamy is just as good as fame, right? Let's just take a look at some of the options you have while browsing 50/50, and you let me know whether you'd be willing to take that bet. Men getting eaten alive by shark versus men dancing with shark. A beautiful neighborhood versus man gets electrocuted until his head falls off the side of the roof. A Bob Ross painting versus a decomposing corpse. Wizard spider with his magic hat and mighty staff versus horribly infected spider bite. Honestly, the risk versus reward factor isn't enough for me. I feel like the only reward is the relief of not being exposed to something disturbing, but hey, some people live for the thrill, right?
Coming in at number 5 today is going to be Fire in the Sky, a 1993 horror biopic. There's not many horror biopics out there. Based around the wild alien abduction of Travis Walton in the late 70s. If you're a Top 5 Scary super fan, and I hope you are, you might recognize that I've talked about Travis Walton a few times on the channel, mostly because it's one of the most infamous and well-documented stories about alien abduction and very directly inspired a movie. In 1975, Travis Walton was working as a logger on an otherwise unmemorable day with 6 other loggers driving around in the forest when they all saw something incredibly bright shining at them through the treetops. One of the men claimed that it looked like a flattened disc, a flying saucer of sorts. And Walton stepped out of the bed of the truck to investigate and was struck by some invisible force that knocked him backwards, which caused the rest of the crew to drive off in a flurry. Some friends just leave you there. When the crew returned, Walton had vanished and awoke, and he thought that he'd been taken to a hospital because he remembered finding himself in a blindingly bright room and could hear people moving around him, but it wasn't until he got a good look at his doctors that he realized something wasn't right. Because his doctors were 3 feet tall with brown quarter-sized pupils, marshmallow-like skin. Walton freaked out, obviously, as I think most of us would do, and was restrained by his captors. He tried to fight them off, but was greeted by a tall creature that he said resembled a humanoid, but was masked by an intimidating Darth Vader-like helmet. Maybe it's just a big fan. The masked creature took Walton and escorted him into an operating room, put a translucent mask over his face, and Walton drifted out of consciousness, unsure if anything was real. He claims the next thing he remembers is walking alongside a highway as if nothing ever happened. He found his way to a phone, called his brother-in-law, who panicked asking what had happened, because it turned out that Walton had been gone for 5 days. Search parties had formed, sent dogs, helicopters, the whole 9 yards, but nobody could find where he was, as if he just blinked out of existence. And then blinked right back. Travis swore what happened to him was a real abduction and has gone on the record many times, maintained his story since that fateful week in 1975 that he was telling the truth. And if you're listening to all that and you think that story sounds really interesting and they should make a movie about it, well, do I have a movie for you. It's called Fire in the Sky. It was in 1993. I haven't seen it, otherwise I'd give you more trivia, but I bet it's pretty good. And if you're looking for more trivia about horror movies that I have seen, well, you can watch the rest of this video, but you can also click through on Top 5 Scary, where we've got loads and loads of horror movie content and pretty much just anything scary you can think of. We got videos on aliens, ghouls, goblins, Frankensteins, true crimes, all of it. Hit subscribe, make sure you hit that little bell as well, but do that at the end of this video because I got 4 more movies coming up for you. Number 4, The Hills Have Eyes. Wes Craven is a master of horror and frequently was inspired by headlines, stories, and the world around him for his terrifying horror movies. Don't be too surprised if this isn't the only mention of Wes Craven on this list. Spoiler alert, it's not. Now, one of Craven's most iconic movies is the original Hills Have Eyes, a terrifying 1977 film about a family that becomes stranded in the Nevada desert and are savagely attacked by a group of brutal raiders who've got a real taste for human flesh. Now, the film was intended to be a commentary on how even in civilized parts of the world, humans can denigrate to unfathomable violence and cruelty, and was largely inspired by a folk tale of a clan of Scottish people-eaters led by one Sawney Bean. The Bean clan lived up in Scotland sometime between the 1500s and the 1600s, and the family is thought to have killed hundreds of people in their time to cook and eat them. Now, there is no definitive, indisputable proof of the Bean clan existing, but several recounts and folklore have persisted about them, causing a good deal of historical speculation. Story goes that Sawney Bean was born to ditch diggers and left home with a vicious woman named Black Agnes Douglas, who shared his violent tendencies. They fell smitten with each other and in a true romance produced 6 daughters, 8 sons, 14 granddaughters, and 18 grandsons, with their clan descending rather rapidly into inbreeding. Hey, the family that eats people stays together. Sunday dinners are important. The Bean clan would lay careful ambushes at night to rob and kill individuals, where they would then bring the bodies back to their cave to dismember and pickle so they could save their leftovers for later. I don't know why, but that makes it worse for me. It's one thing to do that to a person, but to pickle their remains is just too far. After militias were rounded up to crack down on the cookout, eventually this gathered the attention of a king, thought to be James VI, who rounded up soldiers to clear out the Bean clan's cave. Now, tales differ slightly here, but it's thought that when they were found, the Bean clan was summarily executed without trial, thinking they weren't fit to stand one. It's really not much of a leap to see how a clan of outcast, isolated, inbred peasants capturing, killing, and eating people inspired the horrific family in The Hills Have Eyes. Now, I feel like I gotta take a shower or something. After talking about a disgusting family of inbred hillbillies eating human flesh, I feel like we should talk about, I don't know, maybe a slightly more upbeat horror movie, if there is one. Number 3, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I didn't format this list very well because this is also a movie about a clan of inbred hillbilly killer people eaters. Wow, that rolls off the tongue. The original Texas Chainsaw is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. You can see I'm getting a little bit too excited talking about it. There's a little bounce in my step when I talk about Leatherface. It's gut-wrenchingly horrifying in a way that the sequels were just never able to capture. And despite its larger-than-life, terrifying premise, the movie is very grounded and directed in such a grisly style that it seems more like evidence than a movie. It seems like something truly happened to a bunch of hapless tourists. While the whole Sawyer clan are vile, it's Leatherface that dominates your attention, the wretched butcher of the family, clad in human skin, wielding a chainsaw behind dead, broken eyes, a scared, mentally feeble man doing what his parents want. Leatherface is one of the most terrifying horror movie icons ever, and he was based on a real man. Leatherface is inspired by the real-life butcher of Plainsville, Ed Gein, who is an infamous criminal who lived in Wisconsin on an isolated farmstead with his domineering mother. After his mother passed, Gein's mental state deteriorated very poorly, and he began robbing graves to satisfy his desires. Now, Gein wasn't just a grave robber, he was a killer too, let's get that out of the way. He targeted women and he would use their remains to create horrific keepsakes. Gloves, masks, lampshades, clothing, all the things Leatherface and the Sawyer family decorate their home with, you could have found in Ed Gein's home. You can find pictures of these things, but I think I'm gonna give the editors a break. Throw a picture of a kitten or something up here, and if you're curious about it, you can search it on your own time. There are pictures out there. Perhaps most disgusting was his intent to create a woman's suit that he could climb inside of to wear another person's skin. And if that sounds familiar, it's not just Leatherface that Gein inspired. His horrific MO inspired Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs and Norman Bates from Psycho, especially that relationship with a domineering mother. Authorities would discover Gein in 1957 and were shocked by the contents of his house. He was arrested and would spend the rest of his life in mental asylums and died in obscurity, but the legacy he left will shock people for decades after his passing. Number 2, Scream. Oh, if I had to pick like a favorite of all time horror movie, there's a good chance it'd be Scream. I know I literally just said it was Texas Chainsaw. Scream's awesome. It's a fun, clever subversion and satire of tired horror movie tropes. A horror movie in which the characters know they're in a horror movie. And it's just a great slasher with an instantly iconic bad guy. Ghostface was an overnight icon as one of the coolest horror villains. He looks great on a t-shirt. Now, the Woodsboro Killer wasn't just inspired by his love of Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, but by the real-life serial killer Danny Rawlings, known by his gruesome sobriquet, the Gainesville Ripper. Rowling was a delinquent living in Gainesville who had trouble keeping a job and had been arrested several times for robberies and once for stalking and peeping. Naughty naughty. In 1990, Rowling began a string of violent killings, exclusively against petite Caucasian college-aged brunettes. He would break into their homes, kill them, and defile their bodies. He would pose his victims in tableau and these like disgusting scenes in the hopes that the police would be shocked by what he had left for them. Most horrifyingly though, all of this happened in the span of a few days, shocking the college town. It wasn't until later when a killing in a different town of Shreveport gave authorities enough information to put together key details and evidence connecting Rowling to both crimes and apprehend him. He was arrested and put to death. On trial, he said his goal was superstardom and he wanted to be a celebrity like Ted Bundy. Screenwriter for Scream, Kevin Williamson, said that while hearing the news about the Gainesville Ripper, he looked around his house and noticed a window open in his home that he couldn't remember leaving open, instantly terrifying him and causing his imagination to run wild, thinking about a killer prowling around town on young college women, seeking attention, treating it like a game. Now, while Ghostface might be kind of a fun horror movie icon, the real criminal behind him is downright horrifying. Coming in at the #1 spot today is going to be Borderland, which is a kind of unknown horror movie from 2007. You might not have heard of it. I'll throw the IMDb synopsis right here real quick. On a trip to a Mexican border town, 3 college friends stumble upon a human sacrifice cult. That's a classic premise for a horror movie, right? Sounds really scary. Tourists on vacation? Well, you already knew it because the context of this video, it was pulled from the headlines, based on a horrific string of killings and ritualistic human sacrifice perpetrated by a satanic cult. The film is inspired and based around Adolfo Jesus Constanza, a Cuban-American criminal who was involved in the trade and led a cult in the 1980s. He was born in 1962 and operated primarily in Mexico and claimed he was a practicer of black magic. Constanzo's cult, the Narco-Satanists, engaged in all manner of horrific criminal activity, obviously including narcotic smuggling, and human sacrifice. They believed that these rituals would grant them success and luck in their enterprises. Mark Kilroy was an American college student who on spring break was tragically abducted by this cult and subjected to unimaginable suffering for his brutal death. Kilroy was in the wrong place at the wrong time, with a group of friends traveling to Matamoros, a border town across from Brownsville, Texas. Now Mark was young and athletic, which made him appealing to the cult that was seeking out these traits for their sacrifices. He was captured, taken to a remote ranch, killed ritualistically, and discovered in a mass grave alongside other victims. The case was shocking, and it's this horrific glimpse into the darkest recesses of reality that inspired the film Borderland, reminding us sometimes that we really can't write anything scarier than what humans get up to on their own. Number 5. Our first story, and not to give away too much of the plot here, but a lot of the other stories, came from a Reddit thread positing the question, what's your scariest Home Alone story? There were many good ones, but the literal top comment was this by Killer or Angel. It was an average night around 9 p.m. Me and my cousin are at his house, and I'm sitting for the night while my mom and aunt are shopping, and my dad and uncle are at the movies. We're just sitting there feeling strange. Something was wrong, but I couldn't really put my finger on it. I got up and walked to the back door to lock it. When I came back, I saw what was causing that weird feeling. In the window, there was a decrepit and homeless looking man, just staring into the window looking at us. My protector instinct turned on. I pretended I didn't see the guy, and I told my cousin it was time to go to bed because it was too late. I took him upstairs, knowing damn well there was a man outside that wanted in. Now at the time, I was 5'8" and only about 125 pounds. I did play football at school though. If I remember correctly, I went downstairs to grab a meat tenderizer, and I turned back to the window. He wasn't there. I ran to the front door and made sure it was locked, and then I ran back upstairs and went to my cousin and sat down in front of the door. He asked me what was happening, and I told him it was nothing to worry about, that he should just get some sleep. I called the cops and then my dad. The cops said they were half an hour away, and my dad was 45 minutes away. I heard a window shatter and the sound of boots. I told my cousin to stay completely silent and hide under the blankets. It was horrifying. I grabbed the tenderizer and waited. About 5 minutes pass, and I hear the boots walk upstairs. I heard him opening the doors to my aunt and uncle's bedroom, then the bathroom. I heard him make his way to the basement. After what felt like forever, the cops burst in, kicking the door in, and got the guy. Turned out, he was an escapee from a mental hospital a full province away. That's literally like the plotline to a horror movie. Absolutely terrifying, but good on him for having that big cousin instinct and making sure that the cousin was safe. And if you're looking for more freaky stories in this sort of vein, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. If you want something else a little spicier than scary stories, we got aliens, cryptids, conspiracies, true crime, anything freaky, we've done a video or two on. So hit subscribe, please hit that little bell so you don't miss a scream. But would you kindly do that at the end of this video, because I got 4 more scary Home Alone stories coming up for you right now. Number 4. It's another post from this same thread asking about people's scary Home Alone stories. This one very likely is going to have you locking the door tight and probably spending the night with the blankets pulled all the way up to your eyes. I had just moved into my first apartment. It was around 8:30 p.m. and I heard the doorknob moving like somebody was putting a key in it and turning and knocking. At first, I got pretty excited that my at the time boyfriend was home, but then I realized that it was too early in the day. He usually came home nearer to 11 and it was only 8:30 still. So I looked outside at the kitchen window and I didn't see his car or anyone's car that I recognized parked outside, and that's when I started to panic. The doorknob kept moving for a few more seconds and then stopped. A few minutes later, they had some piece of metal that they were sticking between the door to try and open the door. I freaked out, and I locked myself in the bathroom. I grabbed a blade from the kitchen to try and protect myself. I called the cops. Whatever was on the other end was trying to pry the bathroom door open for about 3 full minutes before they stopped. Interrupting the story a bit, can you even imagine how horrifying that would be? 3 minutes locked in your bathroom waiting for the boys in blue to arrive while someone's clawing at your door? This person is braver than I. For context, this video has been about 4 minutes up to this point. Imagine the entire video you just watched, but you're petrified and shaking in a bathroom. Anyway, back to the story. Eventually the cops came in and they found an elderly man roaming my apartment with a crowbar. He used to live in my apartment and he wanted a bunch of stuff back that we took when we moved in. Police told me he was delusional. I'm so thankful and glad I didn't answer to the door. To this day, my heart still skips a beat when someone knocks on my door. And mine too. I don't think I'm opening my door for strangers anytime soon. Number 3. I was home alone and my parents were out of town. We just moved into the house, so there was an empty lot next to the house with a half-built house on it. My parents were the types to always leave the door unlocked. While they were gone, I was watching TV when all of a sudden, the door that leads into my garage from the inside starts to wiggle. I put my TV on mute to listen and I see it move this time. I start freaking out and I'm kind of in shock looking for the phone. I can't find the house phone, so I search for myself. I remembered I left my charger in my parents' car, so now I am frantically looking for the house phone. Our house was pretty new, so my mom hadn't even put blinds or drapes up in the kitchen or living room. Again, no blinds, no phone. Whoever was wiggling the doorknob starts banging on the windows in the living room. I shoot upstairs looking frantically for the phone and also trying to figure out how and where I'd jump out of my house to get away from the maniac that's probably outside my door if I needed to. He then starts pounding on my door. I can tell at this point that he's using something metal or plastic by the sound of the thumps. I genuinely thought he was going to shoot my door open. I remember at that because I was mad at myself for being such a fool. I frequently talked on the phone and I always just left it lying around. I never put it back on the base. I wanted so badly to push the button to detect where my house phone is, but I thought if he heard where it was, he'd break the window near it and take it. I then remembered I left the phone in my mom's room, and as I passed the hallway, I see her dad's old weapon in my parents' bedroom, a long arm. I find the phone and I call 911. As I'm on the phone, the window breaks. I'm upstairs and I am scared to death, and suddenly everything goes silent. I'm waiting in my parents' bedroom. Pitch black closet for what seems like eternity. I hear the sirens. Cops show up, but there's no one to be found. I figured they hadn't gone too far since the incident had just occurred, but the cops never found my tormentor. On the plus side, the company that built the house next to us hired overnight security for the house, which was definitely refreshing. Number 2. In fall 2016, I moved into half of a really old house. It was built in the 1880s, a stone's throw from the original campus of Indiana State, which is now a park filled with homeless people. The owners basically turned it into a weird duplex kind of deal. Anyway, the layout of this house was pretty weird. You walked in the door and you were in a living room type space, and then you kept walking and there was a doorway to a bedroom, and past that was the kitchen. No doors. Only door inside the apartment was to the bathroom and one that led to the shared basement. This is a terrible living situation, may I say. My first night there was uneventful. I was kind of uncomfortable because I hadn't lived by myself in a long time and I was just sort of feeling lonely and on edge. I stayed up late and eventually fell asleep, but woke up around 3 in the morning. Cliché, I know. What woke me up sounded like a group of drummers were drumming on every flat surface of the living room. It went on for a while and I was completely terrified. It was just a cacophony of sound. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I finally gathered up the courage to get up and check on it. And as soon as I passed the threshold to the living room, it just stopped. Nothing happened the rest of the night, but I didn't get much sleep at all. A couple of days later, my friend was visiting and he was about to leave. We were standing by the front door to my bookshelf and I told him about how I was having trouble sleeping, and I told him that story about my first night there. As I was saying this, a book threw itself off the bookshelf and onto the floor 3 feet away. It had to fly past the dresser the shelf was perched and landed between the two of us. He just gave me a creeped out look and said, "I have to go." And I don't blame him. Eventually, I asked the guy in the other half of the apartment what was up, as he'd lived there for 8 years. He told me that no one stayed longer than a year and they all reported the same stuff. For whatever reason, he said nothing ever happened on his side. Doesn't make sense, but there it is. And sometimes, you just don't get the answers, and that's way scarier. And number 1, do you remember your first job? Mine was a newspaper route. Maybe yours was like a grocery store clerk or a babysitter. This next tale is a tale of babysitting gone deeply wrong. Perhaps one of the most infamous home invasion stories in American history is the babysitter killings in 1978. Lauren Strode was a young woman looking to take on a bit of responsibility and earn some spare pocket cash for the upcoming summer. She and her friends had a bit of a sitters club. On October 31st, 1978, Strode was looking after Tommy Doyle, a neighborhood boy while his parents were out, alongside friends Ann Brackett and Linda Vanderklok looking after one Lindsay Wallace. It seemed like it would be a fun night like any other in a sleepy town. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to the girls, earlier that week a mental patient from Smith's Grove Sanitarium nearby had escaped containment and was on the loose and suspected to be around the Haddonfield area. A quiet investigation being led by Sheriff Brackett, Anne's father, and a psychiatrist at Smith's Grove was underway to try and apprehend the patient, who had been incarcerated after killing his sister years ago in a fit of unprecedented, terrifying violence. The patient had disguised himself and was stalking the streets of Haddonfield and had come across Strode out of a psychotic obsession. He stalked the girl for days until eventually making his move, and then proceeded to invade the home of Linda Vanderklok and strangled her alongside boyfriend Bobby Sims. Strode protected the youth she was looking after, and thankfully both Tommy Doyle and Lindsay Wallace were not harmed in any way, and boldly attacked the invader with a knitting needle, subduing him long enough for authorities to arrive, where he was apprehended and returned to Smith's Grove Sanitarium, where he remained for 40 years. Strode remained in Haddonfield, where she lives quietly and would prefer not to be disturbed looking after her daughter and granddaughter, and does not celebrate Halloween much anymore.
Coming in at 5, the Tinder date. Uploaded to r/NoSleep by Small Dog on Desk, great name. They explain their strange Tinder date that may have led to a stalking. I quote, "I think my Tinder date is stalking me. I swear. I don't know what to do because I can't prove it. I can smell him in my home. The putrid stench of grease and third world sewers, mixed with body odor. My apartment has absolutely reeked for days. I haven't gone in except to pick up clean clothes and drop off old ones. I first noticed the smell when I came back from our date, alone. The smell was faint, barely there. For a moment I thought it was my asthma of garbage coming from the open bathroom window. When I closed it, the city scum stuck to my skin. Like the rest of my life, the date had gone just wrong. Gerald, he was strange, he looked like his pictures except that Gerald was greasy. No, he was certifiably oily. His hair looked like it was smeared with a slick, almost dripping pomade, and his skin had a suspicious rainbow sheen, like oil on water. His voice matched the rest of him, sleazy, oozing, cystic. I was instantly turned off. Embarrassingly, I was on Tinder because I had no friends. I can see why, judge much. I had just moved to a middle-sized industrial city in Southeast Asia for my company's 6-month overseas industrial attachment. My colleagues were all middle-aged, and I was absolutely craving for some under 30 interaction. I swiped right on Gerald about 2 weeks ago. An empty profile, but lots of pictures. He seemed normal enough, cute in the tall, lean sort of way. That said, I won't deny that the idea of having a local boy take me around made the idea of 6 months in the middle of basically an industrial nowhere somewhat palatable. When Gerald stood up, he left a slick gloss on the seat. I dropped half of my bill, mumbled something about work, and ran off into the cab that had been waiting for me. I tipped him an extra 20 to wait. I don't remember what was talked about during our date. I do remember seeing him through the window of the restaurant. His eyes were slimy, roving, watching me leave. He texted me in the cab asking for another date. I politely declined, but his replies not so congenial. The smell. It was the smell that made me decide to leave. It was still faint then, just a lingering scent, but it made me nervous, a primal uncomfortable feeling of something that was not quite right. I threw some clothes into my gym duffel, then called a cab to the closest Holiday Inn. That was about half a week ago. The texts had been coming in once every few hours. I ignored them now. Last night I went to my apartment to get more clothes. The smell soaked the front door, spilling into the corridor. I smelled it the moment my lift opened. It grew stronger as I approached the apartment. My doorknob gleamed. It was polished, rubbed raw by scrabbling hands. I didn't need to touch it to know that it would be oily, that it would be putrid. I rushed back to the safety of the hotel, the safety of other people. I sat in the lobby for hours, basking in the fading chatter of tourists, the glow of the ceiling lamps, breathing, just breathing. The desk staff looked at me oddly, but no one said anything. My legs tingled when I stood up. I was exhausted. I staggered. Lobby, lift, corridor, bedroom, bed. I was just sinking into the mattress when I noticed it. The smell of faint, rotting oil. I rubbed the fingers of my right hand together. When did they get covered in grease? Whew. Okay, I'll say that the scariest part of this story initially was the girl's judgment. She tore in and she tore hard. Respect. However, the ending definitely gave me chills. Coming in at 4, the man in the apartment. Posted to r/NoSleep by Reality Subsides, they said, I quote, "There's a tiny man living in my apartment. He roams around when I'm there, moving from place to place, but I can never actually look at him. I'll see him out of the corner of my eye, sitting on a counter, kneeling on the floor, always looking at me, but as soon as my eyes start in his direction, turns out it was just a lamp or a shoe or a cup. He's just always in my peripheral vision. I didn't see him often when I first moved in. I'd occasionally notice a strange shape in the corner, but after looking over, would always pass it off as my imagination. It's my leaning backpack. It's just the garbage can. I tell myself that I was just tired or hungry or drunk. I never really thought about it, then I began to see him more and more often. He began to take shape, to be immediately recognizable. What used to be a vague black shape became something with color, definition, depth. What I used to be able to shrug off as nothing became something real, something ominous, ominous. He began to have a presence. I'd still look over, always with the same result, always trying to convince myself I was just seeing things. Eventually I couldn't ignore it anymore. There was something there, it wasn't my mind. He used to startle me, now he terrifies me. The innocent, silly realization of, oh, I thought that stack of newspapers was a person is gone. Now he's grown an anonymous presence replaced with a heavy feeling of dread. I've started to see him always. He never leaves, he's always sitting there in the shadows in my peripheral vision watching me. Sometimes I'll try to ignore him for long stretches of time. I won't look over at him. I won't acknowledge him. I'll just pretend I don't see him sitting over there, staring at me. I'll just go on about my business. This is when he began screaming. The first time it happened, I was sitting on my couch watching TV. I could see him in the corner, standing there, staring at me, but I tried to ignore him. I tried to drown him out with the television, turning it up louder and louder so it would capture my attention and make me forget about him. I'd still see he was there, but he'd stay in my periphery. I refused to look at him. I remember watching the show, his presence momentarily forgotten, when suddenly he was right next to me, like he instantaneously leapt forward. He was right next to me. I could feel him staring at me. He screamed, the loudest thing I've ever heard, deafening and mind-consuming. I jumped and reflexively looked over, but it was just my jacket draped on the armrest of the couch, vaguely resembling the shape of a person. Heart pounding, I tried to return to the TV, but I could still see him there, standing in the corner, watching me. Well, this is absolutely terrifying. Tiny man in an apartment. Do you believe it, or is it all in his mind? Coming in at 3, the murder trial. Uploaded to Reddit by Bottlewash. To r/askreddit, they responded to the question, what's the scariest story you know that is 100% true? They said, I quote, this is an incident that happened to me about 10 years ago. I live in Melbourne, Australia. I was driving home from work one night around 9 PM midweek, so the roads were quiet. As I was driving downhill, I heard a sound that was like a jet engine roaring behind me. The next thing I knew, a car goes flying past me going twice the speed limit. It looked like a fairly old crappy car. Car started to get the speed wobbles, and then one of the tires came flying off and rolled at speeds downhill, whilst the car spun out and crashed. I stopped my car to make sure whoever was inside was okay. A guy got out of the car and looked over at me, then started moving extremely quickly towards me. I don't know why, but I hit my eternal locks on the car, which was fortunate because no more than 2 seconds later the guy started grabbing at the driver's side door and smashing on my windscreen, with his fists trying to get in. I'll never forget the crazy look he had in his eyes. I put my foot down on the accelerator and drove off back home. Now you may think the story is scary enough as is, well it gets worse. Let's continue. They go on to say, I decided to swap cars once I got home and drove back to see what was going on. I saw 2 fire trucks and about 4 police close to where the incident happened. When I got back to the crash site, the guy was no longer there, so I decided to head home. The next day at work, I was online bored reading the news when I found an article that shocked me. The article was about a guy who had been in a police chase for 1 hour and the police stopped chasing him because it was becoming too dangerous. Turns out the guy was high on meth, had stolen a car an hour drive away, and had been in a hot pursuit since. After crashing the car, the guy apparently crossed to the other side of the road and hailed the first car that appeared, which was a taxi. He got into the taxi and stole it. In the process, he pushed the driver out of the driver's side door and the driver got stuck and dragged at speeds. The driver died from the incident. I called the police and had a detective assigned to me. He fingerprint checked my car and got a statement. I had to testify in the Supreme Court as a key witness in a murder trial. The guy got 30 years and they told me that my testimony was one of the main factors in convicting him. Whoa, how terrifying is that? Remember, always lock your doors, you never know who you might come across down a quiet road. Coming in at 2, Grandma's light is always on. Uploaded to r/nosleep by Saint Entropy, they said, I quote, in one corner of my grandma's living room stood a lamp that was always never turned off. She would change the bulb every week like clockwork, waiting until the afternoon sunlight poured through the windows and filled the room. Even then she hurried, holding her breath until the deed was done and the lamp was back on. I would ask her about it once in a while. Each time she would smile softly, tussle my hair and probably change the subject. I didn't learn the truth until I was 13, the first time I turned off the lamp. I just wanted to see what would happen. Grandma screamed when she walked into the darkened living room, a plate of cookies falling from her hands and crashing to the floor. I could hear her praying under her breath as she raced to turn the light back on. Tears were shining in her eyes when she turned to me, her lips pressed thin. Without warning, she slapped me hard across the face. She gathered me up in her arms and begged for forgiveness. She then finally told me about the lamp. It was a ghost light, she said. Ever since she and my grandpa had bought the house back when they first arrived in America, the spirits of the dead had plagued her. She ended up asking grandpa for help. It was he who had first lit the ghost light, and as long as that beacon burned through the darkness, she had never seen another spirit. Something woke me later that night. I lay in bed listening to the darkness until I heard scratching coming from the living room. Rats were the last thing I wanted to deal with at the moment. I rolled over with a groan, determined to ignore it until the morning. The scratching scratching continued, constantly jerking me from the edge of sleep. I threw the blankets off and stormed out into the hall. I didn't bother turning on the lights as I made my way to the living room. I knew every inch of the house and I moved confidently through it. I was furious at having been woken and my anger was ill-prepared for what I found. An elderly woman was crouched in the corner, her gaunt back to me. She was scratching at the floor where the walls met, stopping every few minutes to cock her head. I had no idea how this woman had gotten into my house, and though it was obvious she needed help, my hand shook as I reached out to gently squeeze her shoulder. I meant to ask where she lived, who her caretaker was, but the words were driven from my mind when she turned and I saw her face. Her eyes were solid black, bottomless pits that didn't reflect the moonlight. Her jaw hung impossibly open, unhinged, and the dark tunnel of her mouth spiraled down into her throat. I had a moment to realize who she was, to recognize the familiar map of wrinkles in her face, the curls of her wispy hair. Then my grandma screamed. I shrieked, stumbling backwards away from the nightmare in the corner. My arms flailed in the air, reaching for the nearest lamp, and my hands touched the ghost light. I yanked the chain, filling the room with light, and she was gone. I never turned off the ghost light after that. After letting the bulb burn out one evening, I began changing it every week just as grandma had. Eventually I got married, and luckily for me, my wife was tolerant of my strange fixation on the lamp. The light continued to burn and I lived my life happily enough. Whew, this one truly shook me. There's something about the supernatural that I just don't want to mess with. Keep those lamps turned on, folks. And finally, in at number 1, kidnapping. Posted to r/nosleep by Nix2307, they describe how 7 years ago when they were 12-13, something awful happened to them. I quote, "I was walking home from school. It was mid-June. I'd just parted ways with my friend and I had 15 minutes to walk by myself before I got home. I noticed while I was walking with my friend that I kept seeing the same red van along our journey. Now we usually go a longer way so we can walk with all our friends, but this red van just kept popping up. Now I didn't think much of it, I just thought they were different vans, but after a few times I decided to memorize the number plate. After my mum had told me to do so if I ever felt like I was in danger, or if something just didn't feel right. I parted ways with my friend and started on my journey home. I decided to take a route that's a little longer than the one I usually take just because I didn't feel comfortable walking through the park by myself, and I just had a bad feeling through the whole walk home like something bad was going to happen. It was only a few streets away from my home when the red van started to just crawl behind me. This man looked in his late 30s, early 40s, popped his head out and started to try and get my attention, and started catcalling me. I remember looking at him and just telling him that I'm not interested and to leave me alone, but that just angered him. He started screaming at me, telling me to get in the van. I'll forever remember his teeth, those disgusting yellow rotting teeth. They were like something from an anti-smoking advert to scare people into quitting. I told him that I would call the police if he didn't leave me alone. He proceeded to laugh in my face. He sped off a little forwards and parked the van, and he was waiting for me to walk past. I crossed the road and started running, trying to lose the man. Just when I thought I lost him, there he was, pulling up next to me. The sliding doors on the side of the car opened and there was another man there trying to grab me and pull me in. I screamed like there was no tomorrow. The man managed to grab my shoulder and I just bit him until I could taste blood. The man let go of me and I ran for my life. I jumped in the bush and hid. I waited until I didn't see the van for at least 30 minutes before I ran home. As soon as I got in, my parents started questioning me. I broke down crying and told them everything. They called the police and I gave them my statement, but nothing ever came of it. I refused to walk home until I turned 16. This is absolutely terrifying. There is nothing more horrible than a child getting abducted. Thank God she reacted the way she did. Stay safe out there, kids.
Kicking off at number 5, the recurring dream. And this story from Reddit user Just Another Gamer is a visceral and horrifying reminder that lingering in the deep recesses of the human mind are some truly perplexing chemical reactions that we can't even begin to comprehend. Have you ever had a recurring dream? Ever thought, what the hell is this all about? What does it mean? Wow, yeah, this person is still asking the same question. As the story goes, Just Another Gamer is an avid cave diver, and since about the age of 6, they explored the unknown caverns across Florida. When they were around 7 or 8 years old, they started to have a strange recurring dream. In the dream, they were exploring a cave and made their way through a little hole in the bottom. Inside was a 10 to 15 foot long corridor a few feet in height and a bent red stop sign at the end, like someone had ripped it off and tossed it inside. As they'd make their way through the corridor, it started descending, quickly opening into a large vertical chamber with a path leading down in a corkscrew pan. Then things would get blurry, but they'd remember the image of trash scattered around the walls, things writhing in the distance, strange things, animals and corpses maybe. Amidst them, they'd see their own family, each one of them being tortured and killed, but in the dream, all they could do was scream. Our narrator had this dream for years and years, always the same thing, until 7 or 8 years later, when they were around 15, they went on a caving trip with their father, a place called Dog Drop out in the Tampa Bay area. Well, when they were descending on a 30-foot rappel, they felt a strange, familiar feeling. When they reached the bottom and looked up, they saw the exact same corridor from their dream. The same strange clutters of trash against the wall, the same red stop sign. Instantly, they were hit with this overwhelming sense of nausea and primal fear, and they froze. All they could do is scream to leave, and eventually their father paid attention to them and packed up their things to leave. Whatever was lurking down there, our narrator knew that it wasn't good. They'd seen it before, deep in the recesses of their own memory, and thankfully they never found out. Coming in at number 4, The Boat Mechanic. And this short and sweet story comes from Two Otters in a Coat, which is a fantastic name, may I add, telling the real life tale about a guy that they knew who made their living working as a boat mechanic. Now, random acts of violence are a different kind of fear, but this one takes it to a whole new level. As the story goes, one Saturday their friend, the boat mechanic, was working alone in their workshop, making some final repairs to a boat that had been brought in. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the mechanic wakes up and he's on the ground. Now, he knew that there was water beneath him just before he's working on a boat, so he assumed that he'd been electrocuted and the shock had knocked him away unconsciously. The strangest part is that he could vaguely sense someone behind him, so he started yelling for help, letting them know that he'd been electrocuted. Whoever was behind him turned and left without a word. He keeps screaming for help until eventually a neighbouring business heard his pleas and came to his aid. Later on though, once he'd been seen by the nearby hospital, he discovered from the police that he wasn't electrocuted at all. According to the police, someone had entered his workshop while he was working and hit him on the back of the head with a mallet from his own toolbox, and nothing was stolen from the shop. Now, this person was never caught and CCTV wasn't clear enough to identify the perp, but as it seems they were walking by and spontaneously decided to knock him out, potentially with the intention of killing him, for seemingly no reason whatsoever. Now that's terrifying. Next up at number 3, The Closet. This story comes from Tighty Whitey's 37, which is as the story goes, back in 2002 they were living in an old apartment that had been built back in the year 1900, making it just over 100 years old when they moved in. Now, everything in the apartment was great apart from one thing: the bedroom, and in particular the closet in the bedroom, which gave them the unnerving feeling that someone or something was watching them when it was left ajar. So much so that when this particular Reddit user was sleeping, they'd often hear strange gasping noises, and it would seem that they were coming from within the closet. They'd check, nothing there. But for that reason, the closet would always stay closed. A month or so of them staying in the apartment, there was a loud bang on the closet door one night, and our narrator was woken from their sleep. It was pitch black, yet they sensed something that emerged from the closet, standing over them, a pressure holding them down in their bed. And yeah, you could explain this away with sleep paralysis, but the end of this story may just make you think twice. Throughout their stay at the apartment, the encroaching sense of dread from the closet had never quite left, and even their friends would comment on the strange feeling that they felt when in the vicinity of the closet. It got so bad that eventually they had the chance to move to another unit, so they jumped at the opportunity, packed their stuff up, and got the hell out of there. Well, a few years later, the owners were renovating the building when our narrator was walking past the doorway of their old apartment. Curiously, they caught the building manager who was painting in the bedroom and began talking about the strange feeling that they felt whilst living there. Without thinking twice, the building owner explained that the former tenant of the apartment had committed suicide. They'd hanged themselves in the closet. And not only that, but the original designer of the building, who had also stayed in the same apartment, had also committed suicide. They'd hanged themselves in the exact same closet. Swinging in at number 2, The Baby Upstairs. And this story comes from Reddit user UrgeHouse666, spooky name bud, who explains an incredibly strange moment during their teenage years. As the tale goes, when they were in high school, their uncle would throw them a couple of bucks every now and then to babysit his kids with their aunt. They lived in a beautiful old 2-story house by the water in a nice area, and the 2 children were around 3 and 6. One day, our narrator was sitting in the den scrolling through their phone when they started to hear a baby crying. Of course, it must be the 3-year-old distressed upstairs, so doing their babysitting duty, they headed to check on them. They called out a couple of times while heading upstairs to no response. They called for their aunt to see if she was dealing with it. No response again. When they turned to start walking up the stairs, they caught a glimpse outside in the yard. It was their aunt with her 2 children laughing and playing on the grass. They heard the babies cry again, the noise coming from upstairs, and all of the hairs on our narrator's body stood on end, a chill running down their spine. Quietly, they turned around, walked down the stairs, got in their car and drove away. The baby was still crying when they closed the door behind them. A few years later, our narrator was drunk at a family party and they mustered the courage to tell their uncle the story. He said that him and his wife used to hear the baby too, crying when no one else was around. According to him, the previous owners had a small child that had died of cot death in the same room that the cries were coming from. Spooky stuff. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the attic. And again, another tale of spooky kids in upstairs locations. Sorry, I hope that wasn't a spoiler. This story comes from Reddit user Ghouls, who tells the tale of the time that they'd moved into their new childhood home. You see, their family had managed to snag a deal because previously the house was used as a model home to show off the housing design of the surrounding area. Upstairs, it had this loft area that had 2 stairwells that attached to it on either end, one in the front and one in the back. You could pretty much hear everything from up there as it was so open. Anyway, one day our narrator and their 2 friends, a guy and a girl, were hanging out in the loft. It was high school, so teenagers being teenagers, the pair were pretty handsy. They were watching TV all snuggled together on the sofa when our narrator got up to take a leak. When they got back, the 2 of them were on completely different ends of the couch, their faces drained of all colour. Our narrator asked them what was up and the guy said, "Your little sister is home." Instantly our narrator's face went white as a sheet. "What's wrong?" the girl asked. You see, our narrator didn't have a little sister and he asked them what made them think he did. They replied that they'd heard her and then they'd seen her, but for all they knew, no one was in the house. To this day, our narrator's 2 best friends swear that they heard a little girl laugh and run up the stairs, hitting her hand on each step like she was running up on all 4s, like kids do. As it turned out, before it was a model home, a family had lived there and their young daughter had been playing upstairs in the loft. She'd climbed a railing, slipped and fell to her death, and no one thought to mention that fact when they were flipping the house. No wonder they got such a good deal.
Kicking us off in 5th place, we have the creatures of Utah Lake. Allegedly around 14 feet deep, the lake has been home to many a mysterious drowning or disappearance over the years, with numerous planes and boats rumored to be littering its depths. The creature of Utah's Bear Lake is the most well-known tale of the local unknown water cryptids. The local surrounding Native American tribes, Shoshone, Ute, and Bannock, were the first to speak about this creature. It was described as a giant serpent, or dragon-like beast, that would capture and carry away any and all that dare swim in the lake. Okay, I won't swim there. In the early 1860s, Mormon settlers began to see these creatures. S.M. Johnson claimed to have seen something akin to a downed carcass floating in the water. He described it as having cluster-like ears the size of teacups, and it could spurt geysers of water from its nose. So a weird-looking whale? I'm trying to picture it. You let me know in the comments if you can picture that. He believed that it must have been of enormous size because it didn't drift to the shore, so its legs must have been embedded in the muddy bottom of the lake. Most of the sightings of this creature describe it as a kind of dragon, or freakish, alligator-like beast. In the year 2000, James Chase noticed something strange swimming in the lake near Pelican Point, around 40 yards from where he was, so a little distance away. He claimed to have seen something that was a little larger than a barrel drum in width, surfaced to the top of the water like a whale, and then submerged again. James said it was shimmering silver in color with large yellow stripes running vertically along its midsection. Now, James is a Hawaiian transplant and had encountered many different forms of ocean life, but he said he had never seen anything like this. Next up, we have water babies. That was my nickname as a kid. Apparently they're something to fear, and are also known as water kelpies or merfolk. The local water babies originate from the Native American Ute telling and can be found all over the world and fall into the category of undine, which is a fairy water species. Hey, I love fairies. And mermaids. Apparently they can be very dangerous if you disregard or disrespect them, but doesn't that apply to most things? Oh, so you know when you're walking by the shore and you hear the distant crying of babies? Yep, this is what you hear. Now most people will only hear them, because if you see them, I hate to break it to you, but Probably too late for you. Many a boater has come upon what looked like floating reeds or lakeweed, but in actuality, it's the hair of the water baby just floating at the surface, and just below it, this water baby hides waiting for the unsuspecting fisherman to fall into its trap. Okay, good to know if I ever randomly decide to take up fishing. Probably not gonna happen. I've done it like once in my lifetime. In fourth place, we have modern mummification. Yes, I'll back it up with some context first. I'm not evil. This is one of two scary religions I'll be discussing today. And while they're not necessarily on the traumatizing level of scary, it definitely falls under unsettling for, well, me at least. Back in 1975, Claude Corky Noel claimed to have had an encounter with highly intelligent beings he called Summa individuals, who revealed to him the true nature of the universe. Corky promptly changed his legal name to Summum Bonum Amun Ra, Corky Ra for short, and founded the Summum religion. Its name is a play on the Latin word summus, meaning highest, and the religion is based out of Salt Lake City. To an outside observer like myself, Summum resembles a blend of science fiction, with alien encounters, cloning, New Age mysticism, and a healthy blend of ancient religions. Summum draws many of its beliefs from Egyptian polytheism, with a particular emphasis on the sun god Ra, although it also relies on the teachings of Gnostic Christians, such as those found in the Gospel of Thomas. Practicing the religion relies heavily on meditation, aimed at the summum goal of spiritual psychokinesis. For those who are unaware, psychokinesis is the power to move objects with your brain. Something I wouldn't mind doing when I do my grocery run next week. Groceries get heavy. A particular peculiarity of the church is that it practices modern mummification. Fun alliteration. It believes that mummification allows for a soul to smoothly depart from our world to the next. Additionally, it claims that the modern mummification process they use preserves the cells and enables them to be cloned in the future. Do you at least sign a consent form first? For Summum followers, reincarnation is a scientific as well as a spiritual concept. The Summum Pyramid was built between 1977 to 79 and serves as the church's main teaching space, meditation hall, and provider of modern mummification. Yeah, try saying that 5 times fast. Their pyramid, like their religion, is sealed except to the open mind. Whatever the heck that means. Here's something to chew on. The pyramid itself, which incorporates, the divine proportions into its measurements, is not zoned as a church, but take a wild guess. You're not gonna get this. A bonded winery. This is so the pyramid can produce what the Summum Church calls nectar publications, which are alcoholic drinks used during meditation services. Since the organization doesn't keep formal membership records, they base the number of people who have received the message of Summum on the number of wine bottles, or publications, they have distributed, which is somewhere around 250,000 to date. Okay, this is so wild to me, seeing as Utah is one of the driest states out there. To make ends meet, the Summum Church offers mummification services to non-Summum members for those who yearn for something more. It offers the service to both humans and pets alike. Prices range from $67,000 for a person to as low as $4,000 for a pet under 15 pounds. All I can think about right now is like that one episode of Criminal Minds where the unsub mummified people while they were still alive, and I kinda hate my brain for it. In third place, we have the legend of Old Main. As the legend goes, Virginia Loomis had her life ended in the late 1800s, and her body was discovered on the boulder used to make many of the bricks to construct the Cedar City building in 1898. It's said that some of the bricks contain her red bodily fluids, with one of them being occasionally on display at Southern Utah University. The supposed killer, Stephen Farr, later in life was hired as a janitor at the university, where revenge was served. On his first day of work, he was lighting the old coal furnace in Old Main's basement when something caused the furnace door to slam shut on his arm. Stephen burned to death, unable to wrench free, becoming the human torch that burned Old Main to the ground in 1948. It's said the ghost of Virginia was seen laughing in the flames, and Virginia was written on Stephen's skull. It's referenced at least as far back as a university newspaper article in 1986. There, it talks about the spooky happenings documented from the beginning, and a parapsychology expert who was brought in back in 1948 to solve 50 years of the building haunting people. I'm all for a girl power gal haunting like she rightfully deserves. In second place, time to visit Skinwalker Ranch. Dang, it's been a minute since I've talked about cryptids, hasn't it? Well, here we go. Sherman Ranch, also known as Skinwalker Ranch, has been reported as a hub for paranormal activity ranging from UFO sightings to strange beasts with red eyes. The 500 acres of isolated land is located between Ballard and Vernal in Utah. The Sherman family acquired the ranch in the 1990s, but Native American myths of skinwalkers, witches with the ability to shapeshift into various animals, have haunted the region for centuries. Before the Sherman family inhabited the ranch, the spot was known as UFO Alley, and the Desert News reported in 1978 that nearby residents had spotted a dome-shaped UFO over the ranch that was surrounded by a glowing green light. Now, the supernatural activity didn't end when the Sherman family inhabited the ranch. The family reported doorways of light appearing in the midair, cattle that vanished, animals mutilated on the property, crop circle-like patterns in the surrounding fields, unidentified flying objects or orbs, and invisible objects emitting destructive magnetic fields. While investigating the disappearance of cattle, one man reportedly saw a large beast, like a wolf but larger, and cattle near the ranch. The man fired a tiny kaboom at the creature that hit its intended target, but the creature didn't slow down and appeared to escape unscathed. Well, if I ever find myself in Utah for some weird reason, I know where to visit. In first place, we have the Kingston Group cult. This is sadly the one entry on today's list that's more horrifying from icky stuff instead of, spooky stuff. So if you want to jump over to the conclusion for ooky spooky creepy instead of yikes, feel free to do so now. I'll meet you there. For those who feel like they can endure listening to this, here goes. In 2022, the Kingston Group was on the receiving end of a lawsuit from former members that alleged years of unpaid labor, people selling, and icky non-consensual sexual stuff. The sex ex-members claim that it's largely through illegal marriage practices that the group is able to unlawfully make women and their offspring religious martyrs and traffic them for sexual and labor purposes. The lawsuit contains explicit details of how Kingston Group leaders allegedly arrange incestuous and sometimes way too young marriages between youngins and adult men with exalted status to produce hundreds of future followers. The suit alleges episodes of forced insemination aimed at forcing pregnancy and teaching elementary school attendees about plural marriage. 9 of the plaintiffs claim that the Kingston Group made them begin working during their elementary or preschool days, through their late teenage years, never receiving a paycheck. In her complaint, Amanda Ray Grant claimed she was assigned to work in her early teens at Advanced Copy, where wedding announcements and invitations were printed because, wedding pictures of incestuous or plural marriages can't be printed at Walmart. Another plaintiff, Jeremy Roberts, says he started working 4 hours a day, year-round, at a farm run by the Order when he was in the higher single digits of age, and by the time he was in the lower double digits, he was working 12-hour shifts at a mine that the Order ran. While the Kingston Group, founded in 1935, is not affiliated with the infamous FLDS, members practice a fundamentalist version of Mormonism that involves, polygamy. Members are primarily born into the organization, whose leader, Paul Eden Kingston, is known as the Man in the Watchtower. The lawsuit explains how the birth certificates of multiple plaintiffs failed to list their biological fathers, so those men could escape the legal consequences inherent to having multiple, often too young, wives. 2 of the plaintiffs share the same father, Jesse Orville Kingston. The suit alleges Kingston family members tried to preserve their lineage purity by marrying and procreating with other, Kingstons. Jesse Orville Kingston is not listed on either birth certificate, according to the lawsuit, which additionally accuses him of fathering more than 300 offspring with 14 wives. That's too many. No. I don't even want to have the idea of giving birth to one single being. Multiple? 300 divided by 14? I don't like that math. No. The Kingston Group argued that it's the parents' prerogative to file birth records for their children how they choose within the bounds of law, saying in a statement that it's especially true of the mother, who has the legal right to establish paternity or not to establish paternity at the time of filing. Okay. The statement added that the group has not issued any specific guidance for members pertaining to birth certificates, medical records, but encourages its members to follow the law. I'm calling bull. Anyone else? Kicking off this list, in 5th place, we've got attempted insemination. For safety's sake, since I have a lovely lexicon of no words to avoid, ask someone in the comments if y'all are confused about my wording at any point. 19-year-old Tanner met 22-year-old Miranda through Tinder while they attended the same college. And the first time they hung out, it was a casual Netflix hangout at Miranda's place, and he left thinking she was decent and wasn't against making future plans. They started texting and Snapchatting throughout the following week and organized some plans for the upcoming weekend. Out of nowhere, she started sending him unsolicited Fun pics. He has very adamantly stated that he never once asked for them, and while they were hanging out the weekend prior, there was no fun activity at any level. While it caught him off guard, he wasn't put off by the advances. Fast forward to the weekend, Miranda and Tanner are hanging out at his place with his roommates when she asks if she can stay the night, and Tanner agrees to it. Being a gentleman, he offered to take the couch, but she mentioned she'd rather share his bed, something he's open to. As things move to the bedroom, they engage in consensual intercourse, with Tanner shedding his condom after the event's end. After lying together for a few minutes, Miranda gets up abruptly, grabs the condom off the floor, and runs into the bathroom. Tanner was a little confused, maybe a little concerned, but didn't read too much into it until he heard a loud crash in the bathroom, Miranda cursing, followed by no response to his query if she needed help. Out of concern, thinking she fell and, cracked her head open or something, he approached the washroom, witnessing Miranda standing in his shower with one leg propped up, trying to shove the condom up her, hoo-ha after she'd flipped it inside out. Tanner rightfully panicked and slammed the door, unsure of how to act. Miranda quickly left, and Tanner never heard from her ever again. While this story might not seem as horrific as others to come, it definitely left my mind boggled. In fourth place, we have a multifaceted date. On a random lonely fall day, resident lonely heart Nicholas was swiping and matched up with a lovely looking lady named Holly and sent off a hello to kickstart a conversation. While I might not be much of a dating app expert, that's quite often a long shot way of catching attention, but hey, it worked. Holly immediately offered to meet up, and Nicholas jumped at the offer, with the duo deciding to meet at a nearby frozen yogurt spot. When he arrived, Holly was already deep in a bowl of dessert, so he purchased his own serving and joined her, with the duo exchanging the usual small talk to break the ice. Eventually, the topic of school came up, and at the time, Nicholas was a junior in college, so he told Holly about what he was studying and that he wasn't entirely sure what he wanted to do after he graduated. She laughed in response, saying she knew exactly what he meant. Who doesn't? Holly explained that throughout her time in high school, she regularly wore men's clothing and as a result, had an interest in designing men's clothes. So naturally, Nicholas asked if she was studying fashion, and she responded by telling him that she hated high school so much that she decided not to go to college, which, honestly, I can kind of understand. She continued by saying that she was a very creative person, and that she was writing a book before also casually mentioning how she was in the process of starting a photography company. Nicholas asked how those were going, and she said that they were more theoretical than reality at that point, going on to explain that her backup plan, if none of the other endeavors panned out, was to become a surgeon. Although she lacked any of the training for it, Holly gleefully told Nicholas that she could see herself going down that path because she wasn't afraid of red bodily fluids and gore, which grossed Nicholas out. Without prompting, Holly continued by telling him that she was certain she could handle the graphic nature of being a surgeon because she personally euthanized a sheep that past summer, describing the ending in detail, going as far as mimicking the human-like shriek that the animal made when she ended it. Now this is where most people would probably start, making a run for it, but Nicholas was determined to see if there was more to this wild tale. Alright, Holly went more in depth with details, claiming that her family regularly euthanized goats and sheep as part of rituals for their strong shaman background. She hushed her voice as she leaned in and said that her religion had actually gifted her with psychic powers, which manifested as voices in her head, and those voices were so strong that they were telling her exactly what to write in that book that she had already mentioned. At this point, Nicholas finally made an excuse to leave, blocking her, and never heard from her ever again. In third place, we've got a scummy rich man. 20-year-old Allison worked in a sushi restaurant all during college, and one fateful night, noticed an attractive man and his friend during a crazy dinner rush. She described herself as running around like crazy, but managed to give them good service, and in return they tipped well, making them memorable. After the shift, she was at home enjoying an adult beverage and mindlessly swiping on Tinder, trying to recover from all the craziness of the night, when she spotted a profile matching the man from earlier, who was easy to recognize from his distinctive face and tattoos. She took a chance, swiped right, and fell asleep from exhaustion. The next day, she woke up to find out that they had matched, and he'd sent some pretty sweet messages. She decided to engage in conversation, finding out he was in town for business, and he proceeded to ask her out for dinner that night at a fancy restaurant. Thanks to encouragement from her roomies, Allison said yes. The man originally insisted on picking her up, but thankfully, Allison was adamant on canceling the date if he continued. If you ask me, red flag number 1 for this gal. The two met up at said fancy restaurant, where the man proceeded to order a $200 bottle of wine, lobster, and more, with Allison guessing that the total cost of the meal was somewhere in the $600 range. Whoa, I balk at like a $20 meal, but that's just me. Apparently the conversation started out normal enough, but Allison soon found out that not only was the man married, but allegedly he was in an open relationship. Rightfully, she didn't believe him, so he called his wife on the spot after texting her photos of Allison. Apparently the wife was bi and asked her husband to invite Allison to their home in Cancun for some fun together. Red flag number 2. Once the call ended, Allison decided to ask the man how he afforded his lifestyle, and he casually mentioned that it was through a drug cartel, quickly trying to reassure her though that it was all safe and on the up and up. Being a sensible person, Allison immediately tried to leave, but he followed her to her car. He was showing her photos of his wife, saying that she should really go to Cancun with them, and that she owes it to him to go back to his hotel room, since he spent so much on dinner. Finally trying to force her to kiss him. Allison was eventually able to get into her car and get away, but was terrified he was going to follow her home. So she drove around for a while, and eventually opted to spend the night at a male friend's home for safety. Oh, and deleted Tinder the moment she got home. In second place, we have a first date gone sour. User Teeny Gecko on Reddit is to thank for sharing this horror tale with the interwebs, and since my tongue is in the mood to trip today, for simplicity's sake, I'll refer to her as Teeny. During a day of mindless swiping, she came across the profile of a guy named Carlos, thought he was cute, and as one does, swiped right, which resulted in an instant match. They chatted for a while and made plans to meet up at a local carnival at 9 p.m. the next night. Teeny arrived on time but heard nothing from Carlos until he called her at 9:30, claiming to have overslept from a nap, and she told him not to bother showing up, saying they'd try again another time. Unfortunately for our romantic pairing, Teeny's dad suddenly took ill, and she spent the next 6 weeks visiting him daily in the hospital. And between that and work, didn't really have time to date, which made Carlos angry. He made a fake Instagram account, which he used to follow Teeny and everyone that she followed. One night in particular, Teeny's sister had flown into town to visit their dad, and they had gone out to dinner with a group of friends, which had been posted to a friend's public Instagram story. Carlos showed up at the restaurant to confront Teeny, yelling all sorts of profanities. Yeah, I don't think I can say those. And thankfully, a waiter who witnessed the entire exchange called the police. For over 10 months, since Carlos had Teeny's number, he kept calling her using different phones, and she'd pick up the phone to hear only the sound of him breathing. One day in particular, Teeny was expecting a call from a friend and noticed a missed call from a landline she thought belonged to that friend, so she called it back and wound up talking to Carlos's mom. She took the opportunity to tell his mom everything, shaking the entire time, worried the mom wouldn't believe her. Now, lucky for Teeny, not only did the mom believe her, but begged Teeny not to call the cops, but to call her directly if she ever heard from Carlos ever again. Thankfully, there's a happy ending to this listing because Carlos never contacted Teeny ever again. In our first place today, we have a stalker. Just a warning for y'all out there watching, this is probably the most my stomach has ever been nauseous while working on a video. In terms of content warning, I will be discussing life ending, so if that's triggering for you, please just skip to the conclusion or feel free to skedaddle. I promise you're not gonna hurt my feelings. Our story begins the same as the rest, with 21-year-old Britt scrolling through Tinder, finding a 27-year-old named Matt that seemed pretty neat. They worked in the same industry, both enjoyed Star Wars and other fandoms, so she swiped right. Of course they matched, or else I wouldn't be talking about the sicky tale today. They talked for hours that first night and realized they had mutual friends, so Brett felt safe enough to meet up with Matt for a public date. The date went well and evolved into a steady relationship. Things were never perfect, with Matt being somewhat transparent about struggling with some mental health issues, but they were undeniably in love. Matt was constantly posting on Instagram about how much Britt was the one, and she was thrilled. After 4 months of being together, the couple had their first fight, arguing over a reaction Matt had to Britt joking with a coworker about safety. Britt suggested they take a small break to regroup, feeling unsafe with the level of anger Matt had shown, which led Matt to scream at Britt in the public setting they were in and stalking off. That night, on Instagram, he claimed he was going to end his life, posting videos of a nearby mountain cliff saying he was going to jump. Britt and other friends of Matt's were rightfully concerned, and with enough of them calling the police, he was apprehended before he could, but was released from police custody that same night. Britt still cared for Matt, but was rightfully in shock from the events and had taken a pause from texting him to figure out her mental state. The next day, he showed up to a regularly scheduled brunch date that he and Britt would attend with her friends, but looked at his own table, silently watching the group from a distance until that group of friends decided to just abandon the location and escort Britt safely home. Later that night, Matt took to Instagram claiming he'd been forgotten already, wishing that no one should ever see the day they'd be treated like a freak, and many other tangents about being ignored and abandoned. The day after, he posted a long essay to social media, claiming he'd come to his senses and was going to take a break to clear his head, also sending a personalized essay to Britt about not wanting to hurt her, but how much he loved her and wanted them to get back together. Britt chose not to respond and debated blocking all his information. His hiatus from social media didn't happen, and Matt posted endless blocks of text for the next 2 weeks about how people like him don't deserve happy endings, that he would never forgive himself, and listing all the interests he could no longer enjoy because of Britt leaving his life. The last straw for Britt was when he posted artwork of her with her favorite book character, writing a fictionalized accompanying story about her perfect summer vacation without him. She blocked his number and every social media platform she could think of, but Matt was determined to make her take him back. Through a friend, he found out about yet another social event Britt was attending and posted publicly about going, just to see her again, and actually showed up at this event. This led Britt to involve the police, opting to start the long process for a restraining order. Over the next 2 months leading up to her first court date, Matt publicly claimed to attempt to end himself no less than a dozen times, with multiple countdowns, flipping between claiming that Britt was cruel and abandoned him, but also that he needed her and the other friends that had since cut ties with him back. He would call her number and leave voicemails, had bookmarked an anonymous app that she had previously used for public questions to send her statements to please take him back, but also asking how much guilt she would feel about celebrating his death and more. I'd be here for over an hour if I went in depth about just how much this guy posted over those months. He would post photos of them together and regularly list off names of people that had cut him off. Finally, the day came for the first court appearance, and despite Matt's claims of wanting to see her, he didn't appear. He later posted that he thought the summons was just a scare tactic and started yet another death day countdown, this time alleging that he wanted to jump off the roof of Britt's building and haunt her for the rest of her life. Eventually, he was sentenced to prison for his actions, and I've never been happier to see a peaceful ending.
Coming in number 5, we've got the Rat Men of Southend. Who could forget Dear Rat Boy, am I right? Well, if you forgot him before, prepare to have some imagery burned into your brain for life. There are actually a couple of tales referring to a rat man from Southend, so why not talk about both? The first is a little more fun and a little less tragic. Tragic nonetheless, but more juicy details and less cold-blooded murder. So according to some, at one point, the mayor of Southend was indeed a rat bastard. Not literally, but in the way that he constantly and unrepentantly cheated on his wife. Poor woman, although she did choose to marry a politician. So as divine punishment for this mayor's consistent adultery, his son was born with a rat face and a long tail. This did not sit well with the social climbing couple, but what could they do? For a while they would feed their son the only thing he craved: meat. This rat boy would chow down on raw flesh like nobody else. Eventually they realized they couldn't possibly raise a meat-eating rat lad in full view of the public, so the mayor had an underpass with secret chambers built just for his rat son. And for the rest of his days, Rat Boy lived in the dank, dark underpass, attempting escape and scaring anyone who dared pass through. He eventually grew into a rat man in his own right, and even killed a few folks for food. The legend persists, with some night tours insisting that they stroll the underpass in case he decides to come out at night. Yeesh. The second story has more to do with the man and also rats, but I'll tell it anyway. Apparently there was an old man also living below an underpass. He had no belongings save for his clothes and a blanket, and he did his best to stay hidden away. However, one day a group of rowdy teenagers came across this man and mercilessly beat him. Once he was incapacitated, they stole his blanket and left him to die in the cold. Unable to move due to his injuries, the man eventually did succumb to hypothermia. Following his death, hundreds of rats emerged from the shadows to consume his lifeless body. Thus began the legend of the Rat Man, consumed by the scurrying dark masses that plague the city. Some say that you can still hear strange scrabbly noises near that underpass. Could it be the descendants of those rats looking for more human flesh? Or maybe it's the ghost of the Rat Man himself, crawling around, disemboweled and confused. Coming in number 4, we've got fairy dogs. Doesn't that just sound lovely? Like a little dachshund puppy with little Tinkerbell wings? Well, that is not what these fairies are like. Of course, the fairies that folks see in Disney movies are much friendlier than the ones from folklore. Fairies of legend are often mischievous, looking to cause trouble in best case scenarios and trying to ruin people in harsher cases. So it stands to reason that fairy dogs might not be so sociable. No belly rubs or ear scratches will make these fearsome canines friendly. See, there's an idea out there that crossroads are the door to another world. If you make the wrong choice or linger too long, you might find yourself staring down a fairy, a demon, or a god. Not necessarily what the average person wants, you know? These otherworldly beings usually live their lives unseen and unsensed by us, but at crossroads their actions might become more apparent. Some crossroads might even feature a fairy dog or two. These four-legged fiends guard the entrance. They're known for glowing bright green, making sure you don't mistake them for a regular dog. And if you see one, it's best to turn around. They'll bark twice as a warning. Alright, 2, remember that. And don't worry if you think you might miss one of these barks, they're as loud and commanding as they come. But if you do not heed this warning and the dog gets out a third bark, you are doomed. Sure, good things come in 3s, just not this time. Hey guys, if you're liking the video so far, make sure to give it a big thumbs up, it really helps us with the algorithm. On with the list. Coming in number 3, we've got the knocker. You would think that mining is scary enough as is, right? Heading into underground tunnels to blast away at rocks until you find some useful materials, hopefully not getting caved in, probably not running out of oxygen, etc. Well, this dangerous career comes with its own share of folklore too, just to make sure that some unexplainable spooks become even spookier. The knocker is a mining monster. Based on the sounds of underground work, it is a spirit that lives within the same tunnels that the helmet-wearing workers descend into every day. Apparently the knocker is the ghost of a tin miner. It's 2 feet tall with a big head, long beard, and arms that almost drag along the ground. Being the ghost of a miner, it carries all the necessary equipment from lamps to pickaxes. Folks familiar with mining might know about the knocking sounds that echo throughout. This is a very scary sound as it can often be indicative of a cave-in. The actual knocking came from the creaking of earth and timbers before giving way, but to some of the miners the noise came from these malevolent spirits attempting to knock down the walls. There are actually all sorts of knocker-related tales, ranging from benevolent to malevolent, but sometimes remaining largely benign. But the scariest additions are those who went around the different tunnels stealing equipment and food, leaving the miners in terrible situations. Sometimes they would even purposefully misdirect miners, leaving them lost in the labyrinth of mine shafts and passages. Worst of all, they're associated with mine fires, which are absolutely horrifying. So make sure you toss the last bite of your meat pie into the mine for the knockers, lest you find yourself in a whole world of trouble. Coming in at number 2, we've got boggarts. Nasty, nasty creatures these ones are. A lot of folks are familiar with them thanks to the Harry Potter universe, but the idea of rotten little buggers ruining everything has been around for a lot longer than that. Household spirits looking to cause as much trouble as possible, boggarts are something nobody ever wants to deal with. They're famous for making possessions disappear, causing milk to sour, and having dogs walk lame. Definitely not fun. And once you've found yourself in the upsetting company of one, good luck getting rid of it. They will stick with your family no matter where you go, no matter how far you run. Your things will keep disappearing, your food will keep going bad, and you'll always be haunted by the knowledge that an awful little is making all of it happening. But don't even think about reasoning with a boggart. Sure, they were once helpful brownies or silkies, but something offended them or caused them to feel mistreated, and now they are just pure bad. Even if you offer to make a deal or treat it nicely from now on, it will respond very negatively. It will get furious and wreck all of your stuff in one go instead of doing it mischievously over the course of many years. So yeah, it's like a poltergeist you can't escape, but somehow worse. Folks that have to deal with these, not happy folks. And finally at number 1, we've got Black Shuck. We've talked about fairy dogs earlier, but that was just the beginning. This is the true terror dog, the big, brutal bad boy, the canine carnivore fueled by carnage, a hate-eyed and vengeful black dog full of rage and malice. There are all sorts of variants based on where you are, from the Gargest to the Guy Trash to the Padfoot, but the best known is Black Shuck. See it and you are out of luck. This thing is the embodiment of Satan. Wherever it goes, destruction follows. A harbinger of doom with blazing red eyes. If you see one, you are supposed to hide or make sure not to look at it. If you neglect to avert your gaze, your luck will get so bad that you die within the year. Holy smokes, right? There's one tale from a Suffolk church that tells of a Black Shuck visit during 1577. The enormous dog came running in, killed a man and a boy, and caused the steeple to collapse through the roof. It then left in a hurry, leaving dark scorch marks on the door. And that was just one little tale. Even if you're a dog person, you do not want to run into one of these. Something tells me that a treat won't smooth things over.
Coming in at number 5, Cyclops. I mean, we can't have a giant creature list without including one of the most infamous giants in history, Cyclops. Hailing from Greek mythology and then later Roman mythology, the Cyclops were giant one-eyed creatures who can be distinguished in 3 groups. In Hesiod's Theogony, they're the brothers Brontes, Steropus, and Argus, I think, who provided Zeus with his weapon, the Thunderbolt. In Homer's Odyssey, they are an uncivilized group of shepherds, the brethren of Polyphemus encountered by Odysseus. Cyclopses were also famous as the builders of the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae and Tyrannus. For the sake of avoiding confusion, let's focus our attention to the Homeric Cyclopses. In an episode of Homer's Odyssey, the hero Odysseus encounters the Cyclops Polyphemus, the son of Poseidon, a one-eyed man-eating giant who lives with his fellow Cyclopses in a distant land. They live in the world of men rather than among the gods. Homeric Cyclopses are presented as uncivilized shepherds, savages, and have no regard for Zeus. They live solitary lives and have no government. They are said to be inhospitable to strangers, slaughtering and eating all who come to their land. Coming in at number 4, Corb or the Fomorians. The Fomorians are a supernatural race in Irish mythology, often portrayed as hostile and monstrous beings who come from under the sea or the earth. However, later they were portrayed as giants and sea raiders and enemies of Ireland's first settlers. They appear to have once been gods who represent the harmful or destructive powers of nature, personifications of chaos, darkness, death, blight, and drought. In Old and Middle Irish, the race is typically called the Fomor or Fomori, with an individual member being called a Fomor. They are often regarded as malevolent spirits dwelling underwater and in the nether regions of the earth, before later being portrayed as the aforementioned sea raiders. This was heavily influenced by the Viking raids on Ireland that were taking place during this time. Oftentimes they were depicted as having the body of a man and the head of a goat, and according to an 11th century book they are said to have one eye, one arm, and one leg. Coming in at 3, Titans. Hailing from Greek mythology, the Titans were the pre-Olympian gods. According to the Theogony of Hesiod, they were the 12 children of the primordial parents Uranus and his mother Gaia, with 6 male Titans, Oceanus, Cous, Creus, Hyperion, Lapetus, and Cronus, and 6 female Titans called the Titanides. Cronus mated with his sister Rhea, and together they became the first generation of Olympians. Zeus and his 5 siblings, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Descendants of the Titans are also called Titans. The Titans were also former gods, the generation of gods preceding the Olympians. They were ultimately overthrown as part of the Greek succession myth, which told how Cronus seized power from his father Uranus and ruled the cosmos with the Titans as his subordinates. Now Cronus and the Titans were in turn defeated and replaced as the ruling pantheon of gods by Zeus and the Olympians in a tenure referred to as the Titanomachy. As a result of the war, Cronus and the vanquished Titans were banished from the upper world, being held imprisoned under guard in Tartarus, although according to history some of these Titans were allowed to remain free. Coming in at 2, Fatchin. Hailing from Scottish folklore, the Fatchan or Fatchin is a monster or giant described by John Francis Campbell in popular tales of the West Highlands, as having a single eye in the middle of its face, a single hand protruding from its chest instead of arms, and a single leg emerging from its central axis. Not only that, but it has a single tuft of hair on the top of its head, which Campbell says, I quote, "It were easier to take a mountain from the root than to bend that tuft." Quite the tuft indeed. However, Campbell isn't the only writer to reference the giant. Douglas Hyde did so too in his collection of Irish folklore called Beside the Fires. I quote, "He held a very thick iron flay club in his skinny hand and 20 chains out of it, and 50 apples on each chain of them, and a great venomous spell on each great apple of them, and a girdle of the skins of deer and roebuck around the thing that was his body, and one eye in the forehead of his black-faced countenance, and one bare, hard, very hairy hand coming out of his chest, and one veiny, thick-soled leg supporting him, and a close, firm, dark blue mantle of twisted, hard, thick feathers protecting his body. And surely he was more like unto devil than to man." Now, though hailing from different countries, both descriptions seem to represent branches of a common Gaelic tradition. Finally, coming in at number 1, Caicus. Hailing from Roman mythology, Caicus, meaning bad, was a fire-breathing giant and the son of Vulcan. He was ultimately killed by Hercules after terrorizing the Aventine Hill before the founding of Rome. However, let's go back. Caicus lived in a cave in Italy on the future site of Rome. To survive, he feasted on the flesh of humans and would nail the heads of victims to the doors of his cave. Now, like I said, he would later be defeated by Hercules, and according to Evander, Hercules stopped to pasture the cattle he had stolen from Geryon near Caicus' lair. As Hercules slept, the giant took a liking to the cattle and stole 8 of them, 4 bulls and 4 cows, dragging them by their tails so as to leave a trail in the wrong direction. When Hercules awoke, the remaining cattle made suggestive noises towards the cave, so Hercules, now angry, stormed towards the cave and a terrified Caicus blocked the entrance with a vast, immovable boulder, so Hercules quite literally tore off the top of the mountain to reach him. Caicus responded with spewing fire and smoke, while Hercules attacked with tree branches and rocks the size of millstones. Hercules eventually leapt into the cave, aiming for the area where the smoke was heaviest, and grabbed Caicus, strangling the monster to death. According to Virgil in Book 8 of the Aeneid, Hercules grasped Caicus so tightly that his eyes popped out and there was no blood left in his throat. Yikes.
Number 5 is Slaughterhouse Canyon. Slaughterhouse Canyon is home to one of the most tragic stories I have ever heard. In the early 1800s, a family lived remotely in this area. There were 4 of them: the mother, the father, and 2 children. The father would travel into this canyon and have to leave his family for extended periods of time. These trips were for food, money, clothes, anything to assist his family's survival. One day during his journey, he was lost to the rocks and did not return. Without the assistance from the father, the remainder of the family started to starve. Slowly dying of famine and having no resources, the family, and most specifically the mother, lost her mind. Her madness reached a state that she could no longer come back from, and the incessant bawling of her children for food became too loud in her mind to bear. Dressing herself in her wedding gown, she walked her children to a nearby river and threw them in it to let them drown in the water. Realizing what she had done, her cries filled and echoed throughout the canyon until not long after, she finally perished to starvation herself. It is said that this canyon is still haunted by her undead spirit, that anyone who sets foot on these grounds will hear the shrieks that echoed throughout the canyon centuries earlier, and that extended exposure to this area will cause one to lose their mind exactly how the mother did. Many people report having extreme anxiety when in this area and a deep desire to leave. Perhaps that is the mother spirit attempting to warn people of this canyon so no one suffers the same fate that her family did. Regardless of her intentions though, it's safe to say that Slaughterhouse Canyon is deeply haunted. Number 4 is the Devil's Tramping Grounds. This is in reference to a very strange patch of soil in North Carolina. For decades, this circle of dirt has allowed nothing to grow on it, whilst the area surrounding it is home to luscious wildlife. Now there could be any number of reasons for why nothing is growing on this patch of dirt. Simply because an area of land cannot grow wildlife does not automatically mean the devil himself has anything to do with it. However, for this particular spot of land, that just might be the case. Locals have reported putting objects in the center of the circle and coming back a day later to find their items placed right outside of it. There have also been several sightings of deep red glowing eyes in the night. It's widely believed that this specific circle is used by the devil to dance at night, or in some cases, to perform graphic and gruesome rituals. Therefore, if anything is inside his circle, he will move it to the outside. A daring reporter decided to test this theory one evening and slept in that exact spot in a tent. He said that the entire evening he heard the distinct sounds of dancing footprints outside his tent, but couldn't spot anything when he looked outside. Whether it's the devil or a strange phantom creature performing strange phantom rituals, it's clear that something is not right with this dead patch of dirt. Number 3 on this list is Hoia-Baciu Forest in Romania. This forest has been regarded by many as potentially the scariest and most dangerous forest on the entire planet. Unlike your typical haunted house that may be haunted by a singular ghost, this forest has a plethora of creatures to watch out for. Ghosts, apparitions, dark shadowy beings, and demons have all been sighted in this forest, with one person even stating that they've seen a UFO before. The general note that almost everyone leaves with is this strange feeling of being watched and a strong sense of anxiety. This has been taken to the extreme on several occasions though. One story I came across detailed a man who lost his mind and swore that he had a run-in with a demon or the devil. Another one describes how campers consistently heard the stomping of horses right outside their tent, but when they went to check outside, nothing was there. There was also a tale of how 2 people went into the forest and overnight, one of them became fascinated with death. So fascinated that he became incredibly morbid and could only speak about death and how he wanted to watch people die. This forest started out as local Romanian folklore, but over the years has garnered some serious attention. The general consensus though
is to stay away. Number 2 on our list is the haunted waters of Utah Lake. Utah Lake is a massive body of water that spans 150 square miles. Whilst it's undoubtedly home to a deluge of underwater critters, some of them don't come naturally. On the shores of Utah Lake are a collection of rocks, aptly named the Macabre Rocks. It's said that hundreds of years ago, the area surrounding Utah Lake was occupied by Native Americans. During that period, there was a great famine that was affecting the people in this group. Therefore, mothers of newborn children, rather than subject their child to a life of harsh starvation where they would likely die anyways, were forced by the community to drown these babies in the water of Utah Lake by the Macabre Rocks. It was through this tragedy that Utah Lake became haunted. Many locals of the area believe that the souls of these children still rest at the bottom of this lake to this day. It is undecided whether or not these souls have taken a physical and amphibious form or if they are simply ghostly apparitions. One thing is for certain though, do not go in the water. Approaching the lake, you will start to hear the cries of young children coming from the water. You must fight the urge to go and help that cry. These children, or water babies as they are often referred to, will drag you to the depths of the lake and you will never be seen again. Number 1 on this list is Airedale Asylum, located in Australia. The Airedale Insane Asylum was a mental institute that housed some of Australia's most dangerous criminals for over 100 years. It's said that many deaths occurred in this asylum, averaging roughly 100 per year. Now, it doesn't house any mental patients today, but it is thought that the spirits of these patients are still there. Visitors of the Airedale Insane Asylum often have to leave soon after they've entered due to fainting or feeling unexplained pain or serious nausea. One of the most common things people note is the sound of repeated banging. The sound of somebody smacking their head against the wall rings throughout the asylum, with no one being able to find the origin of it. Some people have reported actually being shoved or bitten with no one in sight. There are also several rooms of this asylum with special characteristics to them. Gary Webb was a longtime patient of this asylum, known to be particularly gruesome. He died a long time ago. However, if you were to tread inside his room, you would still hear the distinctive shout to get out. The former superintendent's office is a place of particular interest as well, since it will give people passing by the unmistakable taste of bitter acid, which is only too fitting considering the superintendent committed suicide by drinking acid many years earlier. This asylum has seen some horrible atrocities in it amongst its walls, and it's clear that some of them will be locked in there forever.